Good evening and welcome everyone to tonight's meeting of the Urban Planning Delegated Committee. Before we commence the meeting, I request that all mobiles are turned off or switched to silent. Thank you. My name is Councillor Nick Stavrou and I chair this committee. I will start by introducing my fellow councillors. Seated to the left of the horseshoe table at Council Chamber are Councillor Jim Park, Councillor Felicity Sinfield, our Mayor, Councillor Wes Gold, Councillor Di Gillies. On the other side of the table, Councillor Lisa Hollingsworth, our Deputy Mayor, Councillor Gary Thompson, Councillor Jane Adders, Councillor Susan Bigger and Councillor Victor Franco. I also acknowledge the Director of Urban Living, Mr Scott Walker to my right, and our Manager of Governance and Legal, Mr Brian Wee, to my left. There are other officers in attendance tonight and they will be introduced as they present their reports. The Urban Planning Delegated Committee meeting has been live streamed on the Council YouTube to enable public viewing of the proceedings. The meeting is also recorded and will be made available on Council YouTube as soon as practicable after the meeting. The primary purpose of the Urban Planning Delegated Committee is to deal with issues under the Planning and Environment Act and under the Building Act. This committee has delegated authority to make decisions on behalf of Council. For those presenting this evening, when we come to the agenda item, it'll be introduced by an officer and I will then call you one by one to come forward and address the committee. If you're making a submission, please present your viewpoints clearly and concisely on why you support or oppose the planning application. Please do not repeat what earlier speakers have said and keep the submission focused on relevant issues and points not previously raised. If you're opposed to the planning application, please tell the committee why you disagree and suggest an alternative approach that would satisfy your concerns. Please focus on your concerns rather than matters of history or detail in the officer's report. There's a strict limit of 3 minutes for each speaker, including councillors, and whilst as chair I can vary that time, I will seldom do. At the 2.5 minute mark, I will make this sound, indicating that you have 30 seconds remaining to conclude your presentation. I would like to take this opportunity to remind all in attendance to extend due courtesy and respect to each other and to the committee as a whole. This includes remaining quiet while others are addressing the meeting and not disrupting the decision-making process of the committee. Mr Wee, are there any apologies this evening?
Through you, Chair, Councillor Watson has an apology this evening.
Thank you, Mr Wee. Councillors and council officers, are there any conflicts of interest that need to be declared tonight? There be no conflict of interest. We move to the main part of this evening, item number 3, presentation of officer reports. Before we begin with the presentation of officer reports, I would like to perhaps ask Mr Walker if he could provide a bit of context as to why the papers have shifted around from last time. If you're comfortable with that, Mr Walker.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, happy to touch on this briefly and explain what has occurred in regard to the timing of the different papers. The initial UPDC agenda for the 15th of May included a list of 5 items. And that agenda paper was published on the 5th of May. And there were indications that that would be a significant agenda to get through for the committee and that there would be a large number of speakers to a number of those items, including the substantive items that were early on that agenda. A decision was ultimately made to split the agenda so that the items could be managed in an appropriate and convenient and timely way for members of the public and for the committee. The split agenda was considered firstly on the 15th of May for the first 3 items, and then the final 2 items were relisted in a paper that was available on Council's website last Tuesday and are now being considered this evening at this UPDC meeting.
Thank you, Mr Walker, for the clarifying comments. We're now ready to proceed with the first item on the agenda tonight, item 3.1, 115 to 133 Cotham Road Q, modify building and extend liquor licence in the area. This item was presented by Mr Richardson. Mr Richardson, please proceed.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. I present an application to amend an existing planning permit at 115 to 133 Cotham Road, Kew. The existing permit is for an office and residential hotel, including the sale and consumption of liquor. The proposal seeks to amend the existing permit to modify the existing building and increase the activity under the liquor licence. The proposed changes to the building includes the relocation of the hotel entry from Cotham Road to Ridgeway Avenue, the deletion of 4 hotel rooms and reconfiguration of internal layouts. In relation to the liquor licence, the application proposes an extension to the red line plan area of the existing restaurant and bar, increase the operating hours of the restaurant and bar to 7 a.m. to 1 a.m. the following morning, 7 days a week. The current permitted operating hours end at 11 p.m. and increase the patron numbers of the restaurant and bar to 250 patrons, including 150 seated. The current permitted patron number is 130. The application was advertised multiple times due to it being originally submitted as 2 separate applications, which were later combined post-advertising. 23 objections have been received, with a 24th received this afternoon, raising the following key issues: adequacy of car parking, increased presence of the hotel in Ridgeway Avenue, and noise emitted from the premises. The objection received this afternoon raised similar concerns to those already considered. A thorough assessment of the proposal has been undertaken against the Burundara planning scheme, as outlined in the assessment report. It is important to note that pursuant to the Planning and Environment Act, assessment is limited to consideration of the proposed amendments to the existing permit. The proposed physical changes along Cotham Road and Ridgeway Avenue will not alter the overall appearance of the existing building. The works will allow the existing hotel and restaurant and bar an increased presence within the Cotham Village neighbourhood centre and improve its interface within the streetscape. Whilst there are changes to the liquor licence area, operating hours and an increase in patron numbers, officers consider the potential amenity impacts will be mitigated through various conditions, for example, the preparation of a noise amenity action plan and closing the restaurant lobby bifold windows at a specific time. It is recommended that Council issue a notice of decision to grant an amended planning permit, subject to the conditions detailed in the report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. We have 12 people that have indicated they wish to make a submission on this matter. 11 are against the recommendation in the report and 1 supports the recommendation. Once I have announced your name, please sit at the top of the horseshoe table. And if a submitter is not present when the name is called, we will move on to the next speaker. I remind the submitters there is a strict limit of 3 minutes, and please commence your submission with your name and the suburb in which you reside. The first speaker I'll call upon will be Mr. Mark Harold, followed by Mr. Gregory Farmer. Mr. Harold.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Harold, you need to press your button there. Thank you. Please start.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, everyone. Our objections have been...
Could you please start with your name and your suburb? No problem at all.
Mark Harold from Kew.
Thank you.
Our objections previously stated include the late night departures of guests and the noise that inevitably brings to the streets as patrons meet at their cars and say their raucous goodbyes. That has got a great risk of increasing greatly with a 1 a.m. closing time. Other concerns we have are people milling around the corner when Ridgeway Avenue is used as a main entrance. That corner does have a lot of heavy traffic going around there, and we're worried about congestion around that area. Other concerns include just drinking outside in sort of what is more akin to a public bar type environment rather than a restaurant, as is across the road at Trentonova. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harold. Councillors, are there any questions for Mr. Harold? You finished well within your time, so thank you. Councillors? There'll be no questions. Please return to your seat in the chamber. Thank you very much for that.
Hi,
Next.
my name is Greg or Gregory Farmer.
Oh, hi, Mr. Farmer. You came at the same time. That's okay.
I did,
No,
sorry.
that's no problem at all. No problem. I thought you may be assisting Mr. Harold,
No,
but
no,
that's
no,
okay.
no.
That's okay. Well,
I'm Greg or Gregory Farmer. Call me Greg,
Mr.
please.
Farmer, then followed by Ms. Penelope Hunt. So thanks, Mr. Farmer. Please proceed.
I'm a resident of Ridgeway Avenue on Kew. We've got a number of objections which have previously been stated, but it's important to reiterate, I think, is that at the moment, with an 11 a.m. licence, the street is very noisy already at 11 a.m. For most of us who have older style heritage houses along that street, our bedrooms are at the front of the houses, and the people that are being entertained in the existing bar and also in the hotel are coming out quite rowdy at night, and that's adding to the comments that I think that Mark made. In addition to that, moving that to 1 a.m, significant imposts on the residents, significant imposts, to the extent that we've got children in front rooms that would be kept awake at night. Second point, I think, was made pretty clearly. At the moment, that precinct, when you look at it on the plans, the majority of the commercial activity is on the commercial side of the road on Cotham Street. When you have a look at Ridgeway Avenue, it is largely residential at the moment, and there's a small e-junct where you can come in to drop off on the hotel. Moving the reception around to Ridgeway Avenue moves from the commercial precinct into the residential precinct, which will severely affect the amenity of our street. There's a couple of elements that will affect. One is foot flow and traffic flow. The second is the cars. There's drop off, put down. At the moment, they're dropping off and putting down on the commercial road, which is Cotham Road. They will have to drop off and put down with no facility for parking or drop off that's actually located on this that is actually going to be on Ridgeway Avenue. So again, residential street used for a commercial purpose. In relation to the liquor licence, 250 people in addition to that, I don't think there's parking space that's correctly allocated within this. There's supposed to be a public car park aligned at the moment. It's not used, it's fully gated. There's always a boom gate on it. And what that means is that all of the patrons that are currently there park on our street and park in the preceding areas, which is, a significant impact on Thursday and Friday and Saturday nights. If that was to move to 3 nights a week at 1 a.m, become particularly difficult. And then the last point is that from our point of view, is that the Ridgeway Avenue precinct is a natural connection for school children between Cotham Road, or the end of the Glenferrie trams, and the tram that goes, the 48 tram that goes down High Street. It's always got many children there. Adding additional alcohol consumption into that area at that time, I think would actually bring another element of danger into our environment that we just don't need in the area. That's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer. You finished well in your time as well. We have one question. Yeah, any questions, councillors? Councillor Addis.
Thanks very much for your presentation. The officers are recommending, I think, that the hours go back to the 11 for some of the nights and only. I presume that doesn't actually address your concern entirely, even though it's a bit better?
Yeah, it's slightly better, but still 1 a.m. in the morning. And to the point on that as well, the noise abatement plan doesn't address intoxicated people walking out into the residential street late at night, and at the moment there are folks that come in and do spend time in some of the areas at the end of the street. There's been another restaurant open up, and it's a natural area that they park in our road. We already get woken up at 11 o'clock at night by people shouting goodbye to their friends and having a cigarette or whatever it may be doing before they actually get in the car and go home. So this would take that from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m, which would be a significant impost for us.
Okay, thank you.
There be no further questions. You may return to the gallery. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, mate.
Call upon Ms. Penelope Hunt, please.
Hi, my name is Penelope Hunt. I am from Kew. In fact, I live on Ridgeway Avenue, right across the road from the current hotel. This change to permit has been presented largely as a change to liquor licence conditions and a change to the hotel entrance onto Ridgeway Avenue. But I'd like to just call your attention to the picture on page 61 of the agenda, and it does show quite clearly how much will actually be changing to the building on to Ridgeway Avenue. It's going from what appears to be an office building as you walk past it at the moment to what will become really an alfresco bar. There's people seated on stools actually out on the street. And even with the current changes to what they've requested with the 1 a.m. licence, and they're only, I think they've said they could have that 3 nights a week instead of 7, currently the proposal allows them to serve drinks on the street there till 11 p.m. 7 nights a week. So my children have bedrooms at the front of a heritage home with thin heritage glass. It's very drafty. It's quite noisy just from, you can hear the tram as it goes along Cotham Road. During COVID times, understandably, they used the driveway area, the horseshoe driveway area, to serve food, to allow some social distancing. And it was a constant noise, just a chatter. I don't think there's any noise assessments that could tell me that I'm not going to be hearing a constant chattering noise from a bar with open windows. And should they choose to keep them open 7 nights a week till 11 p.m, as this proposal will allow them, I can't see that my house will continue to be livable as a residential property. If Ridgeway Avenue is allowed to have commercial space this far into the street, I don't see how we can continue to sleep in those bedrooms. My solution would be that I would have to move out and consider turning my house into a medical practice or some other such business that won't require people to sleep in the house at night. I'm also a bit concerned because this current permit has been through VCAT in 2012, and the unusual arrangement, the way that the hotel, you have to enter through Cotham Road, and the fact that there is no entrance to the bar and restaurant on Ridgeway Avenue was considered at that VCAT hearing, and nothing has been mentioned in this report as to why VCAT decided that, in fact, was quite insistent that all the commercial enterprise had to be in and out of Cotham Road. I think it will be quite another expensive process for both council and ourselves to go through the VCAT process again if this goes ahead as proposed.
Thank you, Ms Hunt. Councillors, are there any questions for Ms Hunt? If there be no questions, you may return to your seat in the gallery. Thank you. The next speaker is Ms Lynn Iverson, followed by Ms Kristen Wickham. You may follow afterwards. Sorry, yeah, separately. Yeah, thank you, sorry.
Okay. Do I have to press anything? Okay. Hi, I'm Lynn Iverson. I'm also from Ridgeway Avenue in Kew. I would like to actually address from the standpoint of the older people in the neighborhood, the 70 plus, the 60 pluses, who are increasingly in that neighborhood, people who have lived there for a very, very long time. Myself, I'm 6 years into the neighborhood and bought the neighborhood because it is, in fact, a lovely residential neighborhood. I know my neighbors. It's the first time in my life I've ever lived in a community where, you wave at people. Addressing the security and concern for me and for the rest of our neighbors, with an open-air alfresco bar, making the reception area on Ridgeway, it puts a lot of transients onto our streets. There are several of us who are widows and widowers who live by ourselves, and so our security is actually a concern for us. And I think that if we have a lot of extra people coming and going, 1 o'clock in the morning, my bedroom faces Ridgeway as well, and I have the speed hump too, so that's always exciting. But the noise level, the number of people who will be coming and going, antisocial behavior, the smoking, drinking, shall we talk public urination, public defecation in our gardens? Yes, that does happen, which will only increase. I walked my dog late at night because I am in a block of units, and I can't let the dog out in the yard, so I have to walk. And the thought of walking down towards Cotham, which is normally where I walk because it's well lighted and there's traffic, but having to go past a bar full of people who potentially will be drunk and then come back past them and I'm walking by myself, that's not a very appealing thought. So, and then there's the kids, you know, all of our neighbors who have small children and not so small children walking past a reception of a hotel outside drinking and eating. And these kids are very cute and lovely, and it is a concern. So that's my concerns. There's more, but that'll do.
You have 30 seconds if you...
No, that's okay.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Iverson. Councillors, are there any questions for Ms. Iverson? Thank you. You may return to your seat in the gallery. Thank you, Ms. Iverson. I call upon Ms. Kirsten Wickham, and the next speaker after that will be Mr. Robert Wickham. Thank you. Proceed with your name and suburb. Thanks.
Hi, my name's Kristen Wickham and I live in Ridgeway Avenue in Kew. I live next door to Penny, who spoke previously, so we're just along from the proposed new reception area. Look, I can talk about things that have already been addressed. I have the same issues, obviously, with the extended licence hours and increased traffic, all of those things. Parking is a huge issue for us. Just on Saturday night, we had somebody else parking across our driveway and we couldn't get out to go where we wanted to go. That's happened many, many times. But one of the things that I wanted to, rather than go over a lot of extra things, is to actually talk about proposals of alternatives. You know, we already have the horseshoe driveway entrance there. Why can't that be used as a new proposed entrance to the hotel? I noticed that there are conference rooms that are there along that driveway, and perhaps flipping a conference room to that front area, then allowing to have a new lobby area entering in from that already existing driveway might be an issue, might be a possibility. The other thing is, instead of having the al fresco bar entrances and along Ridgeway Avenue, why can't you perhaps have it on the Cotham Road end corner, where already we have a bar across the road, we have Centonove, and you could have the outdoor bar seating there, you know, just across the road from Bar Alba. Therefore, you're not bringing in the commercial elements into an already residential street. And I'll just reiterate, my daughter has her bedroom on the front there, we have our bedroom, and we hear every night, even the smallest of noises and conversations of people heading home, you know, unintentionally, but still loud. And those are people who haven't been drinking. We have people that come home drinking and stumbling and shouting and fights. And so anyway, I just wanted to offer some alternatives to think about.
Thank you very much. Ms. Wickham, councillors, are there any questions for Ms. Wickham? There'll be no questions. You may return to your seat. Thank you. Mr. Robert Wickham, and the speaker after that will be Mr. Anthony Walpole.
Good evening, Robert Wickham from Kew. I'm married to Kristen, the previous speaker. We, as she identified, we live directly across from the property. That's under consideration this evening. We're next to the previous speaker, Penny Hunt. Share the concerns about 4 things, really. One is safety, noise, parking, and congestion. I want to reiterate the point that Kristen raised. We had plans after being away for quite some time to go out on Saturday evening. There was someone parked in front of our driveway, and we were not able to fulfill those plans. That's a major concern because parking on the street on Ridgeway Avenue is a major concern, particularly on the top end of the street. That leads to congestion as well, which today, getting in and out of Ridgeway, it is a high traffic zone at the best of times, and having it continue to 1 a.m. potentially is a major concern. We also want to reiterate the fact that our bedrooms face the street, which was mentioned earlier. We've got young children to the left and to the right of us, and we're very concerned about what this will do in terms of sleeping and noise coming into the homes.
Thank you, Mr. Wickham. There appear to be... Are there any questions, councillors? There appear to be none. You may return to the seat in the gallery. Thank you very much. I call upon Mr. Anthony Walpole.
Development. Sorry.
Let me just check why your name has been given. There's been an error there.
That's the next agenda item.
Thank you, sir. There's an error. You may return back to the gallery. We'll call you later. The next speaker this evening is Ms. Georgia Dick.
Hello everyone, I am Georgia Dick and I live in Kew and I'm also on Ridgeway Avenue. Thank you for all attending today. So I want to raise some of my main concerns is one of the capacity concerns. So right now I know that it says in there that 75% of okay. It says that 75% of patrons should be given seating, but considering there's 250 people there and it's only available for them, that means that as there is 150 seated, there could be up to nearly 100 people standing at one point, and I don't think that is conducive to a casual restaurant/bar. That feels like a much more lively venue that is not welcome in a residential neighbourhood. Secondly, I also want to draw attention to the fact that we have windows and what's labelled as a bifold window and servery leading out onto Ridgeway Avenue. I think having a servery and many open windows is also conducive to having many people gather and encourages people to gather around the street and around the area of Ridgeway Avenue. And this is only going to further noise, not only because we have the windows that they can speak to people inside of the restaurant, but it also encourages people to say hi and shout into the restaurant if they see someone they know, and that is going to be a major disturbance on the street, especially when that can happen as windows can be open until 11 p.m. And I also want to say how having those windows open till 11 a.m., it literally states how they'll be closed after that to remove noise spillage. That insinuates that there will be noise spillage beyond up until 11 p.m., which is considerably late, especially considering that it's a residential street. So that would be one of my main concerns also. I'd also finally like to draw attention to the fact that whilst there is parking provided, it's not enough to serve a venue, especially in increasing this size. And although they have got the underground car park, I have personally never seen people use it or drive into it. And there is little to no signage to indicate that that is an area that patrons should park. And that is a real concern to me, that the fact that that parking that is available, which is very minimal, isn't drawn attention to at all. That's all I have.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Councillors, are there any questions for Ms. Dick? Mr. Park, Councillor Park.
Thank you, Chair. In your experience, and just focusing on the car park, is there free access to that, or is it blocked off with boom gates and the like and charged for?
Yeah, so that is actually one of my primary concerns. Like yourself, nobody knows that that is accessible parking for patrons. It is not indicated or signaged well at all. And secondly, even though those boom gates are, I believe, supposed to be open at all times during service hours for that restaurant, from my experience, and I know many other people here can speak to it as well, those boom gates are often closed, and therefore that firmly indicates to anyone coming down the street that that is not an accessible parking area, especially considering there's no signage.
So in your experience, does that drive patrons to park out in the street?
Most definitely, because it's not clear that that's a place that they can park.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Park. Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, thank you. Just to follow up on that, when you say boom gates, is it the roller door that we're talking about, or?
I've seen both. I've seen the roller door closed early when I think it should be open, and I've also seen the boom gates closed all day sometimes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Franco.
Thank you. Do you know if you have parking restrictions on the street and how tight they are to deter?
We do have parking restrictions on the street. There is 15-minute zones, and then permits later down the street, it turns into 2 hours. But repeatedly, I live at 4 Ridgeway Avenue, there is a blocked off zone because the space isn't big enough, and repeatedly cars will drive over a hashed zone and park in that area, which blocks our driveway. And I repeatedly see people not adhering to the parking rules on our street and cars staying longer than they should. Especially for a dinner, I don't think if it is a restaurant, finishing up dinner within an hour is not obtainable.
Thank you, Ms. Dick. There have been no further questions. You may return to the gallery.
Thank you.
Just one moment till I call upon the next speaker. I need to seek some governance and have a conversation with Mr. Walker. We'll resume the speakers. The next speaker I call upon is Michalotic. Yes, thank you.
Is it on? Great.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, councillors. I'm here really want to concentrate on 3 areas where I think the local amenity for the local residents will be negatively impacted. The increase of patrons, which then has a knock-on on car parking. I think it's worth touching on a few numbers, and traffic, opening hours to 1 o'clock, and opening up the western side of the building onto Ridgeway Avenue. Can I also note that the increase is focused on vertical drinking, so 84% of the increase in the liquor licence is for vertical drinkers, not diners. Also, 40% of the proposed patrons will be vertically drinking over the whole of the liquor licence. So that's an extra 120 patrons on 130 square metres. So that's a very big change for this locality. If I look at car parking and look at the VCAT recommendation and actually use that maths rolling forward, it would say we need another 36 parking spaces. If I use the Borondara car parking note, for which I'm not an expert, but I've done my best at 52.06, that's the reference number, you will need another 48 parking spaces. You've heard already tonight that parking is really tight in the area. If you also look at traffic and then actually say all these people are going to drive to the venue, you're looking at another 96 to 150 vehicle movements every 24 hours in the local area. And with the removal of the 4 bedrooms, that only takes 8 vehicle movements every 24 hours out of the area. It is already tight and already really congested. That's why we have the new traffic calming measurements right at the front of the road. I also want to note that serving alcohol, when you read the statement, there is one piece that I think Georgia touched on, that it says that 75% of patrons, while attending the premises, should be able to sit down at a table and chair. That brings it up to 188 people who won't be vertically drinking, which is a big, substantial, I would say, number and change to the planning that's going forward. So that's around numbers. If I then touch on hours of operation, till 1 in the morning. So already we've seen and we've read to say that it will only be 3 nights a week, but I would still say for many of us they're working nights. And it just not, if you concentrate not on people who have over-enjoyed their evening, over-refreshed, you've also got a number of people who do have very loud conversations. You have doors opening, closing. We have a lot of Uber now, traffic on the street, and the Uber drivers do not turn their engines off. So you've got engines running outside people who have bedrooms in Kew and on Ridgeway Avenue especially. I'd just like to touch on something that one of my fellow residents also talked about, which was the opening of the west side. In the original VCAT hearing, it was very clear that any opening after 9 o'clock was not acceptable and all of the patron traffic had to come through the front of the building. The patron traffic will now come via Ridgeway Avenue. And I referenced the NAP that now needs to include a methodology to actually then work out how we will stop patrons then going onto the footpath. There's a very, very small boundary of less than a metre between the red line and the footpath where the children walk to and from school. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, are there any questions? Councillor Park.
Just briefly, on the Uber problem, could you just talk us through how often that happens and where they park?
It happens all the time. So I went running only yesterday, and what you do is you see Ubers and people coming out, not in the horseshoe. They come out of the horseshoe, they stand at the front, outside, and then wait either for their Uber to come or the Uber is waiting for them. They never go into the horseshoe. So that's where people already today are being collected, especially if they can't get a park on Cotham Road. And I see from the photographs, you'll see it's quite a congested road now. So often that's where people elect to be collected. But taxi drivers don't tend to turn their engines off. They wait for their clients to arrive.
And so is it Uber and taxis, or?
It's Ubers, it's taxis. It's actually some private people also picking up, you know, friends who are staying in the hotel or out in the restaurant, but they tend to block that front end of and often double park.
Thanks.
There'll be no further questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Steve Dick, followed by Mr. Daniel Hare.
Good evening, councillors. Thank you for taking the time to listen to us. My name is Steve Dick, as you've heard. Just very, very quickly, I believe this planning application is essentially about 3 things. It's an increase in patrons, an increase in licensing hours, and the changing of the hotel entrance. I'd just like to say very categorically, I object strongly to all 3. All 3 will contribute to significant loss of amenity, as you've been hearing from other respondents. I would just like to bring up one item, which is with regard to how the process has gone forward. We were given the opportunity to discuss this application on the 8th of March. As a result of that, there was a document that was circulated. I have issues with that document in that it is not a true reflection of everything that was said or discussed. And indeed, the Council's final document on page 34 does not also accurately record what was said. For example, no mention was made of the suggestion that we put forward for an alternative siting of the hotel entrance within the horseshoe area, which we discussed, and no mention was with regards to an assurance that the microbrewery was going to be removed, which led us to believe that it was not going to be a pub-type installation or restaurant. We don't believe that the information that has been put into the report is entirely complete, and that is the report that is in front of you at the moment. In addition to that, whilst we can say that it's a selective and potentially an unreliable document because of its omissions, there are other inconsistencies and inaccuracies which further degrade the report. I don't have time to go into them in a great detail at the moment, but the stipulations with regards to alcohol and food is incredibly unclear. It has not helped that the application has been rammed together. And specifically, the red line on the decking area at the corner of Cotham Road and Ridgeway Avenue actually goes through the middle of the decking, as is delineated at the moment. So it would make it impossible to police whether somebody is drinking inside or outside the red line. It's inaccurate, it's ill thought out. The other thing which is kind of related to that, if I may just finish this one point, we're talking about real life here. Whatever regulations are put in place, whatever plans, this, that and the other is putting, what happens is real life. And the ability for council to manage the situation in the street, if it's outside a noise plan, if it's further down the road, it can't happen. People have their cars over driveways. You cannot have that, I don't know the best way of putting it, with the best will in the world, you can have these regulations, these plans, these things which all sound good on paper, but in real life, in actuality, on the street, when it breaks down, and that is where our amenity is lost.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Dick. I'm afraid you're out of time, but thank you. Are there any questions, councillors? If you're close to finishing, I'm happy for you to complete it.
I would just like to say there are too many patrons too late in the evening. Please do not approve what appears to be a pub with 250 patrons drinking to 1 a.m. It's inappropriate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I call Mr. Daniel Hare. Thank you, Mr. Hare.
Daniel Hare, Ridgeway Avenue. I've been a resident for 14 years now, and since the so-called hotel, which is poorly run and not actually a microbrewery, I don't know if there's false advertising there, but doesn't brew its own beer, and when it did, it was terrible. Since it's opened, I've seen a huge increase in just filth in the street. I've had my car, 2 registration plates on my car, on 2 cars stolen. One was involved in a robbery or something. Defecation in the street, human piss, shit, needles, syringes on a couple of occasions, condoms more than occasionally. I've got an 11-month-old daughter that I thought I'd stick around in the area to bring her up in what was supposed to be a nice environment. But in the last 3 or 4 years, it's starting to go downhill dramatically. I see the type of people who turn up to the pub, and I'm not sure about all the regulations and the lines you do. I've got some idea because I'm involved in hospitality, but what is, as the previous gentleman suggested, is real life outside of what is on script is totally different. And what you think are going to be the patrons there, what's in your mind, the kind of mum and dad and the Dr. Joe down the road, they're not going to be the patrons there. The dudes that are going to turn up, I'm probably the best of them. It's all downhill from there, honestly. The Harp Hotel's a good indication of what's going to happen. There's a couple of other pubs down the road. This is supposed to be a residential street where people bring up families to live. But if the council has any purpose or if they foresee Ridgeway Avenue in any way becoming a commercial street, something where you can build, where commercial properties are going to be built, then let us know now so we can do something about it. We can prepare ourselves instead of pretending and then slowly encroaching on normal people's lifestyles and what we've purchased. If you guys pass this, you're clearly out of touch with the average punter.
Thank you. Councillor, is there any questions? There be no questions. You may return to your seat. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir. The last speaker for the developer is Ms. Anna Barclay.
Good evening, councillors. I'm Anna Barclay. I'm from Urbis, we're the planning consultants, and I'm in Melbourne. Is that okay? Thank you. I'm speaking on behalf of the site owner. So the reason that they're proposing this change is to separate the hotel and the restaurant tenancies. It's currently operated by the hotel owner. They're seeking to have the restaurant run as a separate tenancy, which is why they need the separate entrances. I just wanted to clarify a couple of things about the proposal. The first one is that there's no proposal to have liquor on the footpath. That requires a separate footpath trading permit, and that's not part of this proposal. The red line plan is simply proposed to change to now cover the part that's currently the hotel entrance, which is the increased floor area of the restaurant. There's 4 hotel rooms that will be removed to make way for the new hotel entrance. There's also no parking reduction sought as part of this application. The parking rates at the moment require 18 spaces. There are 34 spaces allocated currently, and that's just because the parking rates have changed over time and now are moving towards providing less parking in favour of more sustainable modes of transport, particularly in activity centres. This is a commercial 1 zone, and I acknowledge it's on the border with a residential zone, but the policy for this site encourages activation and street activation. The use is existing and approved, so we're simply seeking to increase the hours to 1 a.m. from 11 p.m, and the permit restrictions proposed by the officers limit that from Thursday to Saturday. There's also a number of conditions that will assist to address amenity impacts that have been raised. One of those is 75% of the area must be used for seating in the restaurant. There's to be no live music, and the bifold doors are to close by 11 p.m. In regard to the VCAT decision, we have been through some of the history. There is a discussion about an entrance door for the restaurant only. Oh, is that okay? Okay.
Sorry.
Did that cut out?
Is everything okay?
Yes, sorry.
That's all right.
Good. The VCAT decision did talk about a side entrance to the restaurant, but there's never been a consideration at VCAT for a hotel entrance on Ridgeway Avenue. And that's required now just to give the separate entrances for the hotel, which is already accessed on Ridgeway through the Port Cochere. Our client is aware of the car parking management plan that's in place and can be enforced by council, and has engaged a signage contractor to rectify the signage in the last day. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Barclay. I have Councillors Jim Park first, followed by Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Barclay, as to the current car parking management plan, is your client abiding by its terms?
And I understand they've sent that they're not with the roller door, and we've been advised by council on Thursday or Friday last week. They've today sent a letter to the hotel operator to ask them to keep the door open. So the conditions require that roller door to be open from 6:30 a.m. till 11 p.m. And what my client, who's the owner of the building, is suggesting that be put on a timer so that is open as it's supposed to be in accordance with the permit.
Right, so the short answer to my question is no.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah, I've probably got nothing else. That really covers it all, I guess, doesn't it?
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Ms Barclay, for your presentation. Couple of questions. Why does the applicant seek to create a third tenancy for the restaurant?
It's not a. The hotel no longer want to run the restaurant, so they won't have a restaurant at all, and they want to get a new tenant in to just separately run the restaurant.
Has the applicant ever considered the restaurant going into tenancy number 2, which fronts onto Cotham Street?
Not that I'm aware of. I understand that's already tenanted.
Okay. And you made mention of encouraging streetscape activation. In particular, is that pertaining to Cotham Street or is it onto Ridgeway?
It's a general policy direction for activity centres and commercial zones, so that's both.
So in your professional opinion, you believe activation of Ridgeway Street is appropriate in this instance with the residential interfaces?
I believe on the corner where the restaurant's proposed, it's entirely appropriate to have activation, and I think the hotel entry is a lower use. It's not a restaurant, and you can already enter the hotel at that point. It's like a residential use. It's a commercial zone. I believe policy directs that's suitable.
So with regards to the current situation as to where the proposed entry into the hotel will be, currently it's secluded private open spaces for units?
Yes, that's balconies for hotel
So
rooms.
would you agree that it's actually a higher activation of that area because it's going from private open space to a public thoroughfare?
To a hotel entrance, yes.
Okay, and you're quite comfortable that that's an appropriate response in the residential area?
Yes, I am, because this is not a residential zone. This is a commercial zone, and the policy supports commercial outcomes. So if it was a residential zone, that's a different question. But this site, even though it's part of the street is residential, this is a commercial zone.
So
and the policy that applies to this site is commercially focused.
So in that interpretation, you don't need to give any bearing of weight to the residential properties abutting?
No, you do give weight, but it's not the same amount of weight as you would give if it was both in a residential zone.
Okay. And with regards to the horseshoe shape, the existing drop-off obviously favours the current location of the hotel reception. How are you intending to use that drop-off with the relocation of the hotel entrance to the other side of the drop-off?
Yeah, so I think that would work probably better because that's where you already drive in, and people often have suitcases. And we will also put a sign on to encourage Ubers and taxis. Ubers probably didn't exist when this permit was issued, but people will then get out of the car and walk to the entrance on Ridgeway.
But there's no ability for passing. You stop, you block the traffic behind you in its current format.
You get out, and it's a drop-off. It's not a car parking area. There's one car space there that's all shared loading and car space, but the rest is for drop-off and pick-up.
All right. Thanks, Ms Barclay. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. And Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you, Chair. Ms Barclay, my question is a follow-up to that already asked by Councillor Park in relation to the roller door. Does the same provision apply to boom gates?
The permit just requires it to be open and accessible. And during those hours, it just specifies hours. So it says, yes, it does apply to both roller door and boom gates.
And is your client compliant with permit requirements for that to be open, as questioned earlier by Councillor Park?
The same answer. They've written to the hotel operator and told them they need to comply, and they were working towards compliance, but at the moment, no, they're not.
So again, would the short answer be no?
That's right. Same answer, yeah.
Thank you. I've got another question, if I may, Chair, and that's in relation to the bifold doors. I'm wondering whether your client would consider a much earlier closure of the bifold doors on Ridgeway Avenue.
Depending on the time, yes. Yeah, what do you mean by much earlier?
Well, something that would probably align with the EPA respecting the bedrooms that are nearby, but I might shortly seek an adjournment to discuss a couple of items with the Director of Planning and Councillor Stavrou as the ward councillor.
Yeah, I think the client would accept an earlier condition to close the windows.
No worries. I'll continue that conversation in a minute. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sinfield. Councillor Gold.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just continue the questioning that's been put already by two of my colleagues with regard to the car park. Thank you for clarifying about the door and the boom gate. How many spaces are there available in the building?
The total spaces?
Total spaces.
I'll need to check. So for this use, for the restaurant, there's allocated 34.
34 for the restaurant.
And 6 of those are to be staff car parks.
Right.
So
28.
28 for
28 for the total
right.
number attending that restaurant.
That's right.
And will those 28 be available once this door is open and once the boom gate's raised?
Yes.
And the signage goes up, it'll be clear that at least 28 of them have some parking.
That's right.
In that building. Thank you. If I can bring you then back to the VCAT deliberations of the original proposal and the activation along Ridgeway, was there any mention at that time of activation related to Ridgeway? I know about what you're putting forward about generally encouraging the activation of frontages, but were there any constraints that you know of put on by VCAT at the time of the original proposal and consideration?
Not that I know of about activation, no.
But there could have been.
I don't think there was ever a proposal. The only proposal I'm aware of is a door on to the restaurant. I don't think there's ever been a proposal for activation along there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gold. There'll be no more questions. Ms Buckley, you may return to your seat in the gallery. Councillors, as Councillor Sinfield has foreshadowed, I propose that we first hear the officers respond so that we don't get that break between the hearing and the responses, and then we move to adjourn once it's appropriate. So I'm going to ask the officer to respond to the speakers and then move to the next stage. Councillor Franco.
Will we be given the opportunity to ask some questions of the officers before potentially moving to a break?
Let me just seek governance, which is the most efficient way to do it. Because you may be able to ask in the adjournment, but let me just come back to you 1 second.
I specifically don't want to ask in the adjournment because I think members of the public will be interested in the questions and the answers. I'll make that point.
Councillor Franco, I'm going to ask for the adjournment after the officers respond, and it will be up to the councillors to decide how we proceed after that, in which mode. Thanks. I'll return to the officers to respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. I'll answer, I guess, raised matters or respond to matters raised by the public in no particular order in terms of when they were raised. Firstly, in regards to traffic and congestion due to the increase in patron numbers, this amendment application does not propose a further reduction from the standard car parking rate in clause 5206 of the scheme, and an expansion upon the car parking rates can be provided if needed. An endorsed car parking management plan dated the 29th of September 2022 specifies the number of car parking spaces required per land use within the site, access to these spaces and signage and line marking required. As a result, the proposed amendments are not considered to lead to a loss of on-street car parking or a significant increase in traffic congestion within the surrounding road network, and the proposal has been supported by Council's Traffic Department. In regards to concerns around an increase in noise and impact on nearby residents, the proposed changes do have an ability to increase noise levels emitted from the site and therefore to impact on nearby residents. However, as detailed in the noise and safety section of the assessment within the report, additional and amended conditions in the planning permit will minimise the impacts of any increase in noise levels, including the hours of operation for the restaurant and bar must only be 7 a.m. to 11 p.m, Sunday to Wednesday inclusively, and 7 a.m. to 1 a.m. the following day, Thursday to Saturday inclusively. The restaurant and bar bifold windows must be closed by 11 p.m. each day to prevent noise spill. The requirement of a noise amenity action plan and EPA noise requirements to be met. If there is mismanagement, the VGCCC can revoke the liquor licence and council can enforce the requirements of the conditions. In terms of concerns around an inappropriate location of entrances along Ridgeway Avenue being a residential street, the proposed changes to the built form, which result in a redirected focus of the residential hotel from Cotham Road to Ridgeway Avenue, is considered acceptable. The proposed changes respond positively to the planning policy framework of the scheme. The site is located in a commercial zone where such uses are appropriate. Regardless, a condition has been included in the notice of decision to issue a planning permit for the existing garden bed planter to be retained to avoid congregation and balance the built form along Ridgeway Avenue. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
As foreshadowed, there has been an adjournment foreshadowed, so I might pass on to Councillor Sinfield to hear what she wishes to seek to do.
Thank you, Councillor Stavro. The submitters have all made very valid contributions to this tonight and give us a lot to think about, and I think that it's probably appropriate at this time, given that you are the ward councillor for the area, that we be afforded a few minutes to consider our options here before we return to public question to councillor question time, so that those questions can be asked. But I would suggest an adjournment of, say, 5 minutes at this point.
Thank you, Councillor. So you're moving the adjournment. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Park. Yep. Thank you, Councillor Park. Officers, councillors, do I have support? Yeah, it's unanimous. So we're moving to adjournment now. So the rules are suspended. So we'll begin the discussion. Resume the meeting.
So moved.
Thank you, Councillor Sinfield.
Seconded.
Thank you, Councillor Park. We're now back into the council meeting, into the UPDC meeting.
Chair, can I just make a brief comment in moving that resumption?
You may.
That I foreshadow a refusal motion. Notwithstanding that, I suggest that we do take questions of councillors if there are some to do, and we'll get to the motion in due course.
Thank you, Councillor Sinfield, and I was thinking exactly the same. So we are now, just to remind everybody, we have resumed the meeting again, and we are now at the point of the meeting where councillors are now having the ability to ask questions of the officers. So I have the first councillor that seeks to ask a question, Councillor Park.
Could I just ask a procedural question? Do we need to open the meeting again after being adjourned?
We do need to open the meeting. I forgot to ask for a vote. Councillor Sinfield has moved the motion. Councillor Park has seconded.
Do we need to vote? Yes, thank you.
The motion's carried. Thank you very much for that. So, as I said, we are at the time of the meeting where councillors are seeking to ask questions of the officers, given what's transpired and obviously your reading of the report. Councillors, are there any questions that you wish to ask of the officers? Councillor Gold.
Thank you, Chair. I picked up a comment earlier about no further parking concessions, but surely the use level of this in this current proposal has increased. There'll be an awful lot more patrons. Wouldn't that sort of indicate that you had needed to change the parking requirements for this facility?
Through you, Mr. Chair. The consideration of car parking and traffic is under clause 5206 of the Burundara Planning Scheme, which the proposal satisfies. There's two differing rates for a restaurant and bar and a residential hotel. In regards to a restaurant and bar, the clause requires a standard rate of 3.5 car parking spaces per 100 square metres of leasable floor area. Based on the overall leasable floor area of 530 square metres, which is proposed, 18.5 car parking spaces are required. The endorsed car parking management plan currently provides 32 car parking spaces for the restaurant, and therefore no further reduction in the car parking rate is required as a surplus is provided. In regards to the hotel, Clause 5206 of the current planning scheme states that car parking for a residential hotel is to the satisfaction of the responsible authority. Council's Traffic Department have confirmed that in applications for residential hotels elsewhere in the municipality, Council has adopted a rate of 0.25 spaces per room. If we were to apply this rate to the 108 hotel rooms proposed under this amendment, a requirement of 27 car spaces would be required. The existing endorsed car parking management plan provides 67 car parking spaces.
Thank you. Just one other question. I know we touched on it briefly a moment ago, but in consideration of this application, did we go back and look at the original VCAT constraints and comments? And are we comfortable that what's being proposed in Ridgeway currently through this proposal is not flying in the face of those? Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair. We did. We have looked at the VCAT history of the application and the amendments which have been made previously. So whilst the permit was issued in 2008, there's been 3 previous Section 72 amendments, 2 of which, both in 2012, resulted in a decision at the tribunal. We have looked at the history and specifically what each of those tribunal matters was in discussion of and the VCAT decision was. Ultimately, the development and the development has been built as per the endorsed plans. At the time of the February 2012 VCAT decision, in which discussed some matters raised earlier tonight, a bar required a planning permit, and therefore the considerations through the current planning scheme differ to those at the time of the 2012 VCAT decision. And thus it's not considered that in any way the officer recommendation would result in a contradiction to any VCAT decision.
Councillor Gold, you have your answers. Thank you. The next councillor is Councillor Franco, followed by Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you, Chair. What advice, if any, do we obtain or have we obtained from authorities like the Liquor Licensing Commission, police or council in terms of breaches and past performance? I ask this because we've heard many comments about poor behaviour, antisocial behaviour. To what extent do we obtain such information and take it into consideration?
Chair, perhaps if I just comment briefly first in regard to planning enforcement. We heard a little bit tonight about, in particular, car parking and breaches of car parking in the street, and there's 2 aspects to that. Firstly, the compliance with the existing permits in terms of access to basement car parking within the building, and patrons not being able to get access to that car parking under the current planning permit conditions. Now, it's something that actually had not been brought to the attention of council in any significant way until this application brought forward that matter, and certainly that is an enforcement matter that is being pursued. The second aspect is in relation to enforcement of the council car parking restrictions within the street, including breaches of the road rules in relation to parking across driveways and the hour or timed parking restrictions within the street. And they are certainly matters that need to be followed up in terms of an enforcement regime, and again, has not been drawn to the attention of council in any significant way in the evenings. In terms of the actions of the applicant and what the applicant has put forward, I'll let Mr Richardson comment further on that.
Through you, Chair, Mr. Chair. The applicant has confirmed, as discussed earlier, that a signage contractor has been engaged with and signage can and will be reinstated within a week. In terms of our investigation into the roller door, communication has been held between Council's Planning Investigation Officer, our planning officers, the applicant, and through to the site operators through the applicant regarding the endorsed car parking management plan and compliance with it. It's now understood that all parties are on the same page. Ultimately, if the endorsed car parking management plan is not complied with going forward, Council's investigation officer would review that further, and generally Council provide 30 days to rectify non-compliances with the planning permit or endorsed plans. Following those 30 days, enforcement action is taken, and ultimately the applicant referred to earlier tonight that the operators are now aware that the roller door needs to be open between specific times as per the existing planning permit conditions, and a timer will be installed on that door to ensure that it is done so.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Mr. Franco, your answer satisfy you?
It didn't actually answer my question. Look, I appreciate the information relating to the roller door and the other parking issues, but my question was, do we seek any advice from the police in relation to the fitness of the operator in terms of their liquor licence, given many of the allegations we've heard here this evening in terms of some behaviour from patrons in the public domain and potentially inside the venue? So do we seek advice from the Liquor Licensing Commission, from the police, etc., in relation to the operation of the licensed venue?
Mr. Walker?
Thank you, and I can, certainly elaborate further and address that specific issue. In terms of a referral to police, that is not a specific referral for a planning application of this type, and there wouldn't be a specific referral to the police. Having said that, there is often liaison between the police and council in regard to problematic venues where there are issues and enforcement of the relevant planning permit conditions. So that is something that we often become aware of where there are difficulties or problems with venues, and that's something that then enables us to take particular action and enforcement action against breaches of planning permits. The second aspect is in relation to the liquor licence. So there are two components to an approval for a licensed premises. The first is meeting the planning scheme and often a planning permit. In this case, a planning permit needs to be issued before a liquor licence can be issued. The liquor licence is then a subsequent decision of the Liquor Licensing Commission in the context of the planning permit process and the decisions there. So both approvals need to be issued before a licensed premises can be established. So the Liquor Licensing Commission will also go through a notification period and seek comments, which will take into consideration objections and issues from a liquor licensing perspective, in addition to those that have already been considered under the planning permit. So a tick is going to be needed in both boxes for any changes to a licensed premises.
Thank you. I have some questions in relation to the parking as well. A generic question and then a more specific one. Firstly, to what extent, or why don't we review the on-street parking provisions surrounding a venue and adjacent prior to a development being approved? And I ask that because there is obviously currently existing impacts to the surrounding residents from the operation of the venue, and the on-street parking restrictions are quite loose. And secondly, can we specifically go in and I appreciate you may say this is a question for a different moment, but can we review some of the on-street parking restrictions? In particular, I note that the resident who's an occupant of number 4, who has problems with her driveway, she has inconsistent signage. Council has a sign showing that parking is available on that site, while at the same time having line markings that suggest that parking isn't. We also have unrestricted parking in the evenings. We've also heard from another resident that pick up and drop off wasn't feasible on Kew Cotham Road, but we've got unrestricted parking there in the evenings, which would eliminate potentially the possibility of having pick up and drop off. So I wonder whether we can separately address some of those issues or review the on-street parking in that vicinity.
Mr. Walker.
Thanks, Chair. There's a couple of different aspects here that are being brought together, and one of those really is around, are there problems or concerns that are currently occurring, and how do our parking restrictions within that area assist or need to be changed or need to be enforced in relation to those concerns? And the concerns might be for multiple reasons and not just from this venue. And that's always something that is open to council. Council has control of parking restrictions. That's something that could be looked at any time. Generally, with a planning permit application, an assessment needs to be made about the parking associated with that premises under the provisions of the planning scheme, and existing parking conditions in the surrounding area are looked at and taken into consideration. And an assessment and judgment needs to be made as to whether the proposal as currently proposed with those relevant conditions in the surrounding area is appropriate and can be supported. As I say, council can always readdress the issues of restrictions in the street and enforcement in the street if there are ongoing concerns that need to be addressed. But the assessment needs to be on the merits of the conditions at the time.
Councillor Franco, you complete? Excellent. Councillor Park.
The officer said in response to about 2 or 3 questions ago that the applicant is now aware of the car parking obligations. Why do we say that? I mean, the obligations haven't changed. They've been in place for a decade, haven't they?
Through yourself, Chair, the applicant should well have been aware of the obligations and expectations. That would be an expectation that I would have, is that any owner of a property and operator of a business should be aware of their relevant conditions.
So
it
the
appears
better way to phrase
that wasn't the case, and that's quite disappointing and has certainly instigated and triggered enforcement action, irrespective of a decision this evening around this permit application. There are enforcement actions underway to address non-compliances with existing permits.
Yep, so perhaps the more accurate way to portray it would be that the applicant was caught out, as it were. Have we comprehensively looked at compliance with other obligations under the existing permit other than car parking?
Through yourself, Chair, generally when enforcement proceedings commence and an investigations officer undertakes action to address concerns that have been raised, they will have a look at other components of the approval. There hasn't been other particular issues that have been drawn to the attention of council from the concerns or complaints that have been raised at this stage.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Thank you, Councillor Park. Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to officers, in relation to the previous VCAT appearance for the previous application, and as a follow-up to Councillor Galt's question earlier, but more specifically in relation to the posture of the building facing Cotham Road and what is known of VCAT's comments in relation to any interface in Ridgeway Avenue and Kent Street, for that matter too. But I'm specifically interested in what's known of the encouragement to face Cotham Road rather than the residential hinterland.
Mr. Walker.
Through you, Chair. So the first Section 72 amendment application, which went to the tribunal, a decision was issued on the 23rd of February 2012. at the direction of VCAT. The application at the time was to amend the planning permit, and what that proposed was the deleting of 3 remaining dwellings at the time, because the preamble was different to what it is now, and replacing them with 5 new hotel suites, changing a loading bay location, which in turn changes would have changed visitor parking locations at the ground level and the number of visitor car parking spaces, deleting the car parking allocation shown on the plans, introducing a new public entry to the restaurant and bar on Ridgeway Avenue, and tiling the balconies on the north and parts of the east and west sides of the hotel. VCAT's decision was to issue an amended planning permit which changed the permit preamble. That's where the inclusion of a residential hotel and the sale and consumption of liquor was introduced. And as a result, a number of the permit conditions changed. There was a condition included in the planning permit issued by VCAT regarding a west-facing door to Ridgeway Avenue from the restaurant to be deleted. The endorsed plans show that that has been deleted, and therefore the plans were endorsed. But as referred to earlier, the bar at the time triggered a planning permit, which it now under the commercial 1 zone of the current planning scheme is an as-of-right use, wouldn't require a planning permit, and therefore the considerations under the scheme at the time are different to those that we've considered as part of this amendment application. The second amendment, which was decided on via VCAT, was specifically in regards to hours of operation and also patron numbers, as opposed to any entrances to either Cotham Road or Ridgeway Avenue.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, so would it be fair to suggest that VCAT took active steps to prohibit access and egress onto Ridgeway Avenue by precluding that door and the access on that western side?
Through yourself, Chair, I'm not sure that we can speculate that they were intent on it being prohibited and prohibited forever and a day. However, I think the comment is that they felt that the more appropriate main access to the hotel should be from Cotham Road. To the restaurant, I should say, should be from Cotham Road.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. And it may be appropriate at this time, Chair, seeing as there are no further lights on, to suggest a refusal motion if you're ready to take that.
I think this is the right time, Councillor Sinfield. If we can put the refusal motion up on the screen.
Thank you. Officers have assisted in drafting a refusal motion. It's slightly different to that circulated to colleagues a short time ago and has been slightly strengthened, so I would suggest it's worthwhile leaving it on the screen for a moment for councillors and perhaps the gallery to read.
Can we make it a bit bigger? Yeah. Not just for us, but for the gallery.
Is there any way for those screens in the rear of the gallery to be turned on for ease of those out there?
But they're not showing the...
They can see up the top, but not on the sides. Yep, thanks.
Begs the question what purpose they serve.
So I think there's been enough time for the motion to be read. I've got Councillor Gold wishes to speak. Yes.
I'm happy to second that motion.
Thank you, Councillor Gold. So we have a mover and a seconder. Councillor Park, were you... At this point, I should also indicate that the usual practice is for the ward councillor, which is me, to move a motion like this. But in the situation that we're in, where I'm sitting in the chair, the councillors closest to this side are more appropriate to move such a motion. So we have a mover and a seconder. And to assist the mover, is anybody opposed to the motion? There be no opposition. Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you, Chair. Given that there is no opposition, I will keep my comments brief. But let me start by saying that we have heard the community in this area and the residents of Ridgeway and Kent and Cotham and around this site. I think there's certainly a mood in the room that this is an overuse or overactivation of this site, and opening the building up to the residential side street is an inappropriate use of that land, albeit I acknowledge it's a commercial one, but that's to face Cotham Road, and I think that's where the appropriate facing of this building is to occur. This motion, I think, sufficiently encapsulates the justification for a refusal here, and I've had a chance to speak to the Director in relation to it, and I'm comfortable that there is more than adequate reasoning here to refuse that. By way of note, and one of the chief concerns raised by the community in their submissions this evening was in relation to noise and a disruption of the amenity in the residential street. The EPA does state that noise from commercial, industrial and trade businesses must minimise the risk of harm to human health and the environment as a result of those premises and comply with noise limits. Businesses must make sure that any noise from their activities or their premises does not unreasonably impact the local community. I just can't see how, with bifold doors opening to a residential street, that could possibly be achieved with a 1 a.m. curfew. The music noise from entertainment venues can have an impact on people nearby. It can be a problem when it disturbs people's sleep, as we've heard tonight, and we know that such ongoing noise can certainly impact health on a longer-term basis. And the music noise you can hear at a residence where people live and sleep, it can include live or recorded music. The EPA does not discriminate between the two. So I understand that from the applicant earlier that there was not going to be any live music, but it doesn't much matter whether it's live or pre-recorded. Now, while the noise is subject to EPA regulations, the patrons cannot be subject to EPA regulations unless it is something like singing along to goodness knows what music may emanate. But the yahooing as people leave in an intoxicated state from such a venue is not controlled by the EPA and leaves us with a real lack of certainty in relation to their behaviour and the amenity impacts to the residential street. I thank officers for their attempts here to reach a mediated outcome and condition an appropriate response to this application, and I think they've done a great job of trying to do that, but it does not meet community expectations. So planning matters like this don't get decided in a matter of weeks or days. This is months and months of work, and I understand that. So thank you for your work in trying to work with the applicant here to reach an outcome, but I think we're of a mind to refuse this application this evening, and I commend the motion on the screen to my colleagues.
Thank you, Councillor Sinfield. Councillor Gold, do you wish to speak now or reserve your right?
I'm happy to speak just briefly. I mean, I'd also like
Chair,
to...
the motion's unopposed.
I can still afford that, given that councillors...
Well, Chair, if you do that, we'll all speak and be here another 3 hours.
Councillor Park, it's within the Chair's right to do that, and given that...
if there's a mood to hold my comments, I'm happy to do so.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, well then, thank you, Councillor Gold, for that. I might just say a couple of words, but not many more than that as the ward councillor. I think Councillor Sinfield put it extraordinarily succinctly and very articulately. I think the officers have done good work to try and what appeared to be squaring the circle here, but our community has spoken to us in heartfelt ways and articulated what is happening in that area in ways that we've heard now. Without further ado, I'm going to put the motion to the floor. And councillors, I put the motion to the floor. Those in favour? The motion is carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, councillors. We move now to Item 3.2, 570 Burwood Road, Hawthorne, construction of and use of a 4-storey building. Ms. Lorini, when you're ready. Shall we change now?
Through you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Lorini. Please proceed.
Okay, excellent. Good evening, everyone. I present application PP 220648 for the construction of a 4-storey mixed-use building comprising ground floor retail and offices above, and a reduction in the standard car parking requirement for the land at 570 Burwood Road, Hawthorne. The site is within the Commercial 1 zone, which seeks to create vibrant mixed-use commercial centres for retail, office, business, entertainment and community uses. The site is within the Burwood Road, Camberwell Road commercial corridor and covered by the design and development, parking and environmental audit planning overlays. The subject site is not affected by a heritage overlay but sits within proximity of nearby heritage precincts. The proposed development has an overall height of 15.62 metres and a street wall height to Burwood Road of 11 metres with a 5 metre upper floor setback. These heights comply with the design and development overlay requirements. The ground floor will be occupied by a retail premises which has direct access from Burwood Road. The upper levels 1 and 2 are proposed for office use, with the uppermost level a communal staff breakout space. A total of 15 objections have been received to the proposal, raising the following key issues: car parking and vehicle access, height and visual bulk to the residential interface, amenity impacts, and impact on the heritage of Edlington Street. Council's urban designer supports the building's interface with Burwood Road, which provides a visually articulated and vibrant appearance to the commercial precinct, including green landscaped wall elements and footpath canopy. The proposed building adopts a stepped design to minimise its visual impact on nearby residential properties. The proposal provides setbacks in compliance with Res Code, which are further mitigated by the laneway width. The proposed development also complies with the overshadowing, open space and overlooking standards of Res Code. Car parking is provided within a 10-space vehicle stacker located to the rear of the premises and accessed via the rear lane. The proposed parking spaces is a variation of the requirements of Clause 5206 car parking. However, the applicant has detailed low-density occupancy of the offices to be ensured by a permit condition. In addition, the application provides for bicycle storage and end-of-trip facilities in excess of the statutory requirements. Council's transport engineers have reviewed the proposal and support the proposed reduction subject to conditions. It is considered that the proposal is consistent with the intent of the zone and projected growth in the area. The design of the proposal contributes positively to the Burwood Road streetscape and provides an appropriate interface with the residential land to the south. It is recommended that Council issue a notice of decision to grant a planning permit subject to conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Lorini. We have 6 people that have indicated that they wish to make a submission on the matter, 5 against and 1 in support of the recommendation. Once I've announced your name, please come at the top of the horseshoe table. The first speaker tonight is Anthony Walpole, followed by Mr. Gareth Nichols. Mr. Walpole. Mr. Walpole.
7.
Press that. Thank you. Anthony Walpole, 3 Edlington Street, Hawthorne, directly behind the proposed development at 570 Burwood Road. This is my first appearance as an objector to a planning application after 40 years as a Burundara ratepayer. My wife and I think most of our ratepayer funds are used appropriately by this council, except in one area: commercial and residential development. You mentioned earlier not to dwell too much on history, but I need to raise a bit of history because it will then become apparent what I'm trying to get at. Before we purchased 3 Edlington Street 6.5 years ago, we arranged a meeting with this council planning department to establish the development criteria for building on Burwood Road, and specifically with the adjacent 570 Burwood Road in mind. The rules at that time were specific and allowed for a maximum development of 3 floors. Since that time, it would appear the rules have been abandoned. So apparently the developer dictates the allowable footprint, evidenced by the 4 stories planned for this application and the 7-storey apartment block nearing completion less than 100 metres to our west on Burwood Road. Our loss of privacy is a main objection. From a distance of 35 metres, the 3 rear balconies and windows of the proposed building will have a direct line of sight into our main bedroom and main living area. We presume the councillors that are here in the council chambers wouldn't appreciate that sort of scrutiny in their own homes, so why should we? No consideration of this objection has been recognised by the council or developer. Frosting of glass, louvers or balcony cover surely are a minimum requirement. Our property is within a heritage overlay, and both my wife and I dread the effect this development will have on its value. Had we known 6.5 years ago what is on the table now, we wouldn't have bought our property. A 4-storey development creates a major shadow, and given that the rear of our property is the width of a narrow lane from the proposed development, we are sceptical of the claims made regarding shadowing and loss of light. To my knowledge, no assessment has been made for the autumn and winter months. In conclusion, we accept responsible and non-intrusive development, but not at the expense of personal space. The increase in parking pressure, noise pollution and devalued Hawthorn livability, which we have paid a price to be part of. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walpole. Councillors, are there any questions for Mr. Walpole?
Thank you for your
Councillor
presentation.
Gold.
Fine. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation tonight. You raised very specifically the concern about loss of privacy.
Correct.
Would you be somewhat happy, a little bit happier with the proposal as it stood if you did have some form of frosted glass, I think you suggested, or other forms of louvers to maintain your privacy?
It would make it more livable, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walpole. There be no further questions. You may return to the gallery. I call upon Mr. Gareth Nichols. Thank you, Ms. Nichols. Name and suburb.
Hi, Gareth Nichols. I live in Hawthorn as well, in Edlington Street. Thank you all for your time tonight. Apart from the numerous errors in the council report, including misnaming the key street we're talking about here, which is Edlington Street, my concern is predominantly parking related. The report indicated that you can expect a higher number of people to drive to work than has been provided for. In their own Urbis planning report, they talk about 64% of people who work in this office will drive there. A lot of the reduction request here in car parking has been based on the developer not utilising all of the office space, but there has been nothing done to actually reduce the office space and nothing to stop future occupiers from increasing the number of office workers. The site statutorily requires 28 car parks, but this proposal provides for only 10, and that's the revised option as put forward by the council officers. The report states only 20 office workers will utilise this building, but there is space for over 50 office workers in the 3 levels of office. This is even excluding the cafe on the ground floor. The entire 4th floor is a breakout area. So one entire floor is just for the office workers to have their lunch every day, of which there are only, apparently, 20. Seems there's a bit of a disconnect there from what their current use they're proposing to council is and what their real use is going to be for this site. Finally, I want to talk about the car parking in the general area. When I go home tonight, I'm unlikely to be able to actually park on Edlington Street. That's before this cafe is developed, before the issues of having people come in for less than 2 hours during the day for meetings, for example, at this office. There's some off-street car parking in terms of some residents, but not all residents have an off-street car parking. There's 3 or 4 of us in a row at the back who have no off-street car parking in this street. This is just going to further exacerbate the issue. Thank you.
You have 30 seconds, but if you finish that.
I think we do, as a community, need to be careful on how we develop these properties along areas like this. You know, I agree that some level of development is acceptable. 4 stories, if we do 4-storey buildings all the way along, which can house up to 50 workers all down that area, you're looking at in excess of 800 extra office workers in just this little block. It's excessive.
Thank you, Mr. Nichols. Councillors, have Councillor Bigger, followed by Councillor Park.
Yep, just a question about the, thank you for your presentation, just a question about the parking on your street. So is that, I mean, I could ask officers as well, but I presume you know, is it permitted? And in what way?
It's permitted between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. for 2-hour restrictions on one side, and, sorry, that's the permit parking, and the other side it's 2 hours but no permit technically.
Yes. Okay,
yes.
so 2 hours.
So it is, yeah, and so this is, you know, overnight when the cafe would be operating, because they talk about having a licence later at night as well, it's an issue, but also during the day. You know, I can do a school drop-off run and come home and not be able to park my car back out the front of my house.
So there are problems on both, can I just clarify, there are problems on both sides of the street, you're saying, with the space in terms of both a permit space
absolutely.
as well
Yeah,
as the 2 hour?
Yeah, there's already problems on the space, and this is before the 7-storey high apartment building, which is in development now, has even been approved yet. That also uses car stackers as well. So, you know, a lot of people are not going to put up with having, you know, if they're doing short runs, going in and out of those car stackers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Park, please.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I missed your surname.
Nichols.
Where do you park typically at the moment?
If I can, out the front of my house.
Right, and it's a house, not a unit?
No, it's a house, 1912.
Right, is there any off-street parking there?
At my house?
Yeah.
There is, no, there's technically one spot out the back of my house. The next 3 houses along do not have any off-street. The next 2 houses do not have any off-street car parking. The house across the road does not have any off-street car parking. There are also a number of units down the street as well.
And in respect of your house and those right nearby, what's the profile? Are they newer houses or old houses?
Predominantly the street, so it's heritage overlay over the majority of the street. Most of the houses were built in between 1912 and 1914. There's 6 houses in a row, which are 6, let me just count that, yeah, well, 6 out of 7 in a row, which were all built between 1912 and 1914. Across the other side of the road, similar thing, most of them were built in between 1912 and 1914. Then there's 3 little 1922 apartment blocks, and they each have 4 apartments in them, which go along to the end of the street.
And is parking on Burwood Road a potential for you, or is it?
Parking on Burwood Road, it's a clear way. Depending on what time of the morning or evening is, it's a clear way on one side. So therefore, my wife got a parking ticket 2 weeks ago because we could not park our car on our street. So then she parked it on the nearest crossway, which is through a church, and still got a parking ticket, even though it's technically in a permit zone. That's right. Right now, we parked actually where you would expect the 7-storey apartment building that's going up right now, where you'd expect any visitors to come for there, that's where we have to park our car on a regular basis. It's a 2-minute walk from our house.
Okay, and my final question, you made reference to some stackers nearby. Could you just tell me about those?
Yep, so the 7-storey apartment building that's going up is using car stackers.
Okay, that's
So,
the new
sorry,
one.
2 lots. So there's car stackers for the townhouses, which make up the bottom 2 levels, and then there's a car lift to get in to the rest for stories 3 to 7. They'll use a car lift to go up and down, but once they get inside, there is a small amount of car parking for them.
And that entrance is from your street or
No,
Burwood Road?
that entrance is from a small laneway which comes off Burwood Road.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Barker. Councillor Franco, followed by Councillor Thompson.
Thanks. Just a few more questions on parking. I had a look at Google Maps and it suggests on Google Maps that one side of the street is permanent resident parking permit only, not timed.
Sorry, yes, correct. Yes, my mistake. Yes, one side between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. So actually the odd side of the street, odd numbers, it's 8 to 6. During the day, it is permit zone only. And the other side is 2 hours, no permit. Sorry, I did make an error there. Yep.
Okay, so have you ever thought to ask for a reduction in the timed period of the 2 hour to say 1 hour?
No, but I'm not sure what that would achieve from a permit perspective.
Turnover of spaces, it makes it more challenging for people to park all day, go into an office, move a car, simply.
Yeah. So I guess at this point in time, that is less of a consideration during the day because, so the business that has been there for the preceding 20 years, up until 2 years ago when they shut down, was a printing press business. They had 2 people there most of the time, plus 1 or 2 people who would come along. They printed T-shirts, basically.
So your concern is about the availability of parking in the evenings?
Well, all day. So if you're suddenly adding in up to 50 office workers there during the day, then yes, we probably need to request a change in the parking during the day. And secondly, your point is correct, then yeah, we probably need to request also a review of parking overnight in the vicinity as well.
And just out of curiosity, how many permits are residents entitled to there, and how many cars do people have, or how many cars do you have?
So we own 1 car. I often also get access to a work car as well. So we have 2 at maximum, between 1 and 2. We are allowed 1 permanent pass, and I'm not sure what it's like in most council areas, but we're allowed to apply for an extra 2 visitor permits as well.
Thank you.
Councillor Thompson, you had your light on, but
Mine was exactly the same as Councillor Franco with regard to permit parking. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Nichols. You may return to your seats. The next speaker this evening is Mr. Gregory Farmer, followed by Mr. Sugunendra Devasagayam. Mr. Farmer.
Mr. Farmer spoke on the earlier matter, Chair.
Hi, so my name's Sagu Thevasagayam. I live in Hawthorne at Edlington Street behind the proposed development. I'll be representing 5 other residents of the area that are unable to attend today. I myself have been a resident of Edlington Street for over 20 years and have been disappointed by the overdevelopment in this area. The objections that we've collated are as follows. The first issue is that of the built form and transition of the building height. The proposal fails to provide an appropriate transition in height and scale to the south, in particular to our homes, which are subject to heritage overlay protection. The proposal will produce unreasonable visual bulk behind our properties as a direct result of the excessive building height and limited rear setbacks. For example, from Edlington Street, when viewing our properties at street level, the maximum height is that of mostly 1-storey homes and 1 2-storey home. The proposed development is for 4 storeys, The visual transition from a 1 to 2 storey home to a 4-storey building right behind it would impact on the heritage overlay that currently applies to our homes and would be visually jarring. We request that the proposed build be limited in height to that of maximum 3 storeys. The building will also unreasonably overshadow the north-facing private space of our homes and restrict sunlight, despite the claims earlier. The second issue is the loss of our privacy and overlooking by the building into the secluded private open space and habitable room windows of our homes. There's not been any mention in the amendments of any form of screening of the balconies or windows that will have direct view into our private garden space and 2 bedrooms of my young children. The final issue is that of the proposed change to increase the car stacking from 5 to 10 with access via the rear. Firstly, the integrity and reliance on car stackers is important to review. We've heard of many stackers which break down and get stuck for days or weeks on end. Secondly, the access to the stacker is via a very narrow, heritage-listed cobblestone laneway that has no through access. This lane is already congested, being a space that's shared by multiple residential properties on one side and businesses on the other. We're extremely concerned about having 10 car stacking parking spaces accessed via this lane and the increased congestion this would bring. For example, given it is a commercial property, if all 10 cars arrived at the same time in the morning, despite there being a 2-car waiting bay that's being proposed, there is potential for another 8 cars to wait in this lane as each car is stacked in slowly. It is unreasonable to have 10 cars being slowly stacked into the property, blocking the lane, particularly if there's an emergency. The lane is also already in disrepair. The only patchworks ever being completed that we know of over the last few decades are spot repairs. The lane is likely to be damaged further through increased traffic if the entry point for it is going to be via this lane rather than Burwood Road. We would like assurances, firstly, that the cobblestone path, if it is to remain heritage listed, is serviced regularly. We ask that the car stacker be removed or be restricted to a maximum of 2 to 4 cars only to keep that laneway uncongested. I would implore the council to restrict car parking spaces in these new developments and encourage use of public transport, which is only 2 minutes walking distance from the proposed development, a train station and a bus stop.
Thank you, Mr. Tegasawayam. Councillors, have you got any questions? Councillor Park.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to confirm that I understood what your last couple of points were. You're actually encouraging us to reduce the number of car parking spaces on that site?
Or the amount of car parking spaces or the permitting for that site to reduce the number of car parking allowable for them because of the issue. Well, it's going to result in 2 issues. One is what Gareth raised, which is the increase in congestion on the parking spaces on Burwood Road, Edlington Street and the streets surrounding. And then also the issues that I've raised about having 10 cars coming in through a tiny laneway.
Yeah, you've heard other submissions that we've listened to tonight, and the suggestion is from other submitters that the proposed 10 car spaces, albeit with half of them on stackers, isn't sufficient, but you're actually saying pull back on that requirement further. I understand
because of the functionality of the laneway. If it was a road with 2 lanes or a wider space and without causing increased congestion, that would make sense. But for a tiny laneway that is a no-through access for 1 point of entry for 10 cars to be coming in and out into a car stacker, which is the other main concern, yes, that is my concern with that.
So, do you think that the car parking in the immediate neighbourhood is satisfactory?
Not at all. Yeah.
So what you're saying, I think then, is that you're concerned that the stackers will just exacerbate the traffic flow and the congestion, and that's a bigger problem for you than the inadequate car parking?
It's both. So I would say both the issues are just as concerning for me.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Buck. Mr. Tevasagayam, we have a few more questions, but I will ask you to go back to the gallery because we need to do a couple of housekeeping issues before we do that. So if you could go back and I'll call you upon.
Sure.
Councillors, it's getting perilously close to the 11 o'clock cut-off, and I'm going to ask for a continuance motion. And Councillor Sinfield.
Reluctantly, I offer one.
Do I have a seconder reluctantly? Councillor.
You have to specify a time.
11:30.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Gold. Thank you, Councillor Gold. Councillors, I put the motion to you. Motion's carried unanimously. So we have continuance. Thank you, councillors. Ms. Tevasagayam, could you please return to the horseshoe table? Apologies for doing this, but otherwise we'd be locked out. Thank you. The next councillor that seeks to ask a question is Councillor Franco.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Just continuing the theme on car parking, council officers required under the draft conditions here an increase in car stacking. So just to be clear, you'd prefer us to not, or preferably remove the condition of car stackers and not require, I can't find the condition at the moment, but I think, and you may know it, if you've read the report,
because of the concerns I've already highlighted, that would be my thoughts.
Okay.
And then, as Gareth raised earlier, I guess the density of the building and the use of it is what I'd like to restrict as well. So that's why the height limit of reducing it down from 4 levels to 3.
And you are also understanding that it's a high activity and growth area. People can use other forms of transport as well if we tighten up the on-street provisions as well, potentially.
Councillor Franco, we need to ask questions. It's getting late, so please ask the question.
Thank you.
Oh, you don't have a question?
I'll leave it there.
Okay. Councillor Vigor.
Yes, thank you. You said at the beginning that you were speaking, I think, for 5 other people.
Yeah.
Do all of you live on Edlington Street or in the very near vicinity?
One on Edlington Street, another person on Hepburn Street behind the other development, and another 2 on Victoria Street, and sorry, 1 more on Edlington Street as well.
Okay. And could you just clarify what the main concern of the group is? Was the main concern about the parking and the implications of the additional parking, or is it relate to the bulk?
It was the height, so the bulk, the privacy concern, and then the car parking and the congestion as well.
Thank you so much.
So those are the 3 main issues.
Thank you, Councillor Vigor. Councillor Gold.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just return to your description of a blocked cobblestone lane?
Yeah.
That's going to be a very big inconvenience for the workers in the office building. How is it inconvenient for you and the other people that you represent? No doubt if you go in through the back, you've got a problem. But the people you represent, do they access parking spaces at the back of their properties via that lane? Or are you just seeing this as a difficulty for the office building? I'd just like to be a little bit clear on that.
Yeah, parking access via that lane. So I have 2 car parking spaces via that lane. We've got 2 cars, so we don't actually use any of the on-street permit parking, which even with that, removing 2 cars from the street to off-street parking is still already a problem on our street. And my wife and I work full-time jobs, and then we already have difficulties getting in and out of that street, waiting for multiple other businesses to come in and park. And so our concern is that access through that street the laneway is already difficult, and a car stacker for 10 cars, which most likely would be quite slow and have functionality issues that we've heard of in the past, would exacerbate that problem. And then result potentially in myself or my wife having to consider parking on the street. If it does get congested and we can't access our home easily or quickly, we'll turn back around, park on the street, and then remove another car park from the street. So, yeah, it just further exacerbates the issue. That was my concern. With
Two more very quick questions.
Quick.
A previous resident spoke to us about the difficulty of parking in the street. If that was made more biased towards residents, would that assist?
I assume it would, but how could it be made more biased towards residents? Yeah.
I just asked the question.
No, that's okay. Yeah, I guess our concern was, if it made it permit parking 24 hours a day, that would be fantastic, because we all have different jobs and different hours, night shifts at times, so it really does vary. So if it can be done, I'd welcome it.
And final question regarding overlooking, and I'm aware of your concern in that regard. A previous speaker tonight suggested frosted glass or something, or louvers to restrict the views from those balconies. Would that be of assistance?
That would help for the frosted glass. For the balconies, from what I can tell, they would need some form of other screening as well, because I think there is area for people to walk out onto the balconies and oversee. So it would need frosted glass for the windows, and I presume some form of screening for the actual
high balustrades.
That's correct, yeah.
Yep, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Wes.
Thank you, Councillor Gold and Mr. Atavasagayam. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
May return to the gallery seat. The next speaker this evening is Ms. Narissa Dillon, followed by Mr. Simon Dillon. Ms. Dillon. Please, with your name, start with your name and address. Oh, sorry, your name and suburb.
Narissa Dillon at number 5
Just
Edlington
suburb,
Street,
sorry.
Hawthorne.
Thank you.
Is that okay? Yep. We are directly behind the proposed development at number 5, and my husband and I, we have 2 small children. And I'm a psychologist, so as a psychologist, I tend to think about things through the lens of mental health and well-being. And a key concern for me is about the ongoing potential impact on our health and well-being that the noise caused by the construction, as well as added traffic, pedestrians and residents will have on us, right up on our back fences, the noise of the stackers. I'm not convinced that we won't be able to hear those from inside our house. I'm concerned that the disturbance will be ongoing, that this build will set a precedent for future redevelopment of all of the Burwood-facing properties behind us. We've already gone through one residential build, and what I observed was that the workers on the site didn't adhere to EPA regulations around start and finish times for building. So as one respondent had said earlier tonight, there's a difference between what's planned and regulations and things and actuality and our lives. And so anyway, there wasn't any effective recourse to make them adhere to the rules. The noisy machinery started when workers arrived on site, which was however early they wanted. The radio was turned up so loud in an attempt to hear the music over the machinery noise. It was like a nightclub. Trucks arrived in the laneway at all hours to unload the building materials. So Sunday night, midnight, the trucks are backing down the laneway, offloading all of this, the building materials, very noisy inside our house. It's affecting sleep. Then there was the dirt, dust and rubbish, and you end up living on edge in constant fight or flight mode, not knowing when the noise is going to start or end. And the noise will not end once the build is completed. That's the other point. There's the construction noise, the noise of the build, but also once the build is complete, from the noise from the additional traffic in the laneway, the pedestrians coming and going, the stackers, that sort of the vehicles in the laneway. So
30 seconds.
Yep. Edlington Street's a wonderful community of hardworking professionals who are raising young families and retirees, some caring for their grandchildren, and we have the right to the peaceful and private enjoyment of what we have worked so hard for, and this build will take that away from us, one redevelopment at a time.
Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Dillon. Councillors, I don't see any lights. There seem to be no questions. You may return to your seat in the gallery. Thank you so much for your presentation. Mr. Dillon, Mr. Simon Dillon. Thank you.
Good afternoon, or good evening, councillors. Definitely not the afternoon. My name's Simon Dillon. You just heard from my wife. I live at 5 Edlington Street in Hawthorn. The property backs directly onto the cobblestone laneway where the proposed 4-storey tower is going to be built. Look, I'm not anti-development. I know that there's a need for it at some point, but there's extremes. And I think with what's being proposed, where we have 2-storey properties for 100 metres either side of this development, and then this 4-storey narrow tower that's being proposed, I think we're going to extreme here. I've got a number of issues I'd like to raise within the timeframe allotted. So firstly, the issue of car parking we've talked about quite a bit tonight. That is a big issue in our street already. I won't dwell on it too much, only to say that a 4-storey building will require more than 10 car parks. Car stackers break down. It's not a matter of if, it's when, and there really isn't that many other options for the people who will be in this 4-storey building other than to go into Edlington Street. I myself often have to park streets away and walk back, so I think we've heard examples of that today. It's a significant issue. Loss of privacy is probably the main issue for me. So we've got a backyard where currently we've got some 2 stories that we're facing out onto, but pretty much it's a private backyard. Having a 4-storey building, no doubt, will have the loss of that privacy for our young family, but also all the families all along. So that's something that we won't be able to get back. I put forward some recommendations on how the designs could be changed to help resolve the privacy. No suggestions were returned. So to me, that's a red flag that there's not a desire to work with us on this. Aligned with privacy, loss of sunlight, clearly the 4-storey building, that's going to impact us as well. The narrow cobblestone laneway, in the design it referred to it as a road. It's far from a road. We're talking about 1 car width. We're talking about a heritage listed cobblestone laneway. The noise you can hear of 1 car going up that today is quite interesting. From halfway through my house I can hear it. When we have 10 cars coming up and down through the night, whenever it might be, that's going to be constant. Car stackers, I imagine that they make noise. They're lifting up these huge vehicles. So there's going to be a constant issue of noise. The property neighbouring this development is a 2-storey office. It has car park access from Burwood Road. It creates no issues for us. The car park is underground. It has perfect setup. It would be exactly what we require. The impact of heritage overlay hasn't been touched on too much here, but our houses are governed by heritage overlay, which I think is right, and I think the council's done a great thing bringing that in. Unfortunately, when you stand at our properties with these towers that are going up, we will be able to see properties behind our heritage overlay houses, and it makes me think, what is the purpose of that first heritage overlay put down?
You're out of time, Mr. Dillon, but thank you. Councillors, questions for Mr. Dillon? Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Dillon, just wanted to ask, when you spoke about you put forward suggestions and you received no response, was that to the applicant's representative?
It was to Kiara, who...
Through council?
Yeah, through council, yes.
Right. And no email recognition? Or?
No, I got email recognition. I got correspondence from her. There was no... She was fine. Yes. It was in terms of what they proposed to come back. The only change was actually made the design worse. It moved from 5 car stackers to 10. Or sorry, 3 to 6 or something along those lines. So doubling the number of car stackers. So that's doubling the traffic going down the laneway. It's doubling the noise of the stackers going up and down. Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hollingsworth. Councillor Park.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to ask a couple of questions, but the first one, I'd just like you to be really brief if you can. What suggestion did you make in terms of changing the design?
Removal of the back balconies that are overlooking my backyard, frosted windows that are overlooking my property instead of the open windows, privacy screens. None of these were addressed. Reduction in the 4 levels, so they're aligned to the neighbouring properties, the 2-storey properties, and car parks rather than a car stacker, and access via Burwood Road, not via the narrow cobblestone layway that will be damaged.
Okay, thank you. And in the report, which I guess you've read, it says that 3, 5 and 7 Edlington Street are the areas that are subject to overlooking, indicate that their rear boundaries to the laneway are predominantly occupied with garages, sheds and car parking areas not required to be screened from view. Do you agree with that, or...?
Absolutely not. I've got a lawn where my children play, so that is absolutely wrong.
You've got what, sorry?
A lawn.
Right.
With a tree, jacaranda tree. Yeah, the kids play out there, swings, slide, so there's no driveway that I have in there. Our parking's at the front of the house and in Edlington Street.
All right. So you're number 5.
Correct.
Can you comment on your neighbours? Is that observation true of their properties?
Well, Sugu spoke earlier. He's got a lawn on his backyard, but also 2 car parks. So his block's probably twice as wide as mine. So he's half lawn, half garage, broadly speaking. And Anthony, who spoke at the start, he's got a shed and also a living area as well. So he's definitely going to be impacted from a privacy perspective as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Buck. There'll be no further questions. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Dillon. The final presenter for this evening is Ms. Anna Barclay. Welcome back, Ms. Barclay.
Thank you. I'm Anna Barclay. I'm from Urbis. I'm representing a different client and applicant this evening. I'm in Melbourne. So I just wanted to address some of the concerns raised. The first one is that we're in a DDO 17, which outlines specific height, setback and setback requirements, both from Burwood Road and from the rear where there's a residential interface. This proposal is entirely compliant with the DDO. In regards to overlooking, the balconies all have a planter space to avoid views directly down. And if you were to apply the Res Code standard, if this was a residential zone, then we would be compliant with Res Code because of the 9-metre arc from each of those balconies. And that's there's a diagram in the report, and that's included in the officer assessment. However, obviously that's something that council can address through condition if it's a particular concern. In regards to parking and traffic, we did increase the amount of parking in response to concerns raised by council. It is via stackers. Stackers are a lot better than they used to be. There's conditions that require them to be maintained and operational. This architect will occupy, the architect who's designed the building will occupy the building, and their business partner, who has a different commercial business, will be the other occupier. So this is a local business who are developing the site. They're not going to lease the building out, which is why they're able to commit to the condition to limit the number of staff on site, and that's all staff, including volunteers for restaurant and the office, to 25. So this is a long-term proposition for them. They're really keen to work and from the area, and they've designed and plan to develop the site and occupy the building. In regard to the laneway traffic, that has been assessed by our traffic engineers and also by council's traffic engineers. They've looked particularly at the morning peak where there could be possibilities for queuing of people arriving at the same time. And the assessment was that based on those numbers, there's a 3.4% chance of a 31-second wait in the morning. There's one of the changes that was made in response to council's traffic engineering comments was a 5-metre setback from the laneway. So there's space for cars to wait on site without blocking the laneway. In regard to heritage and bulk, as I said before, this is entirely consistent with council's plans for this area. It's entirely consistent with the DDO, and that includes additional Res Code setbacks from residential interfaces. And this site is not in a heritage overlay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barclay. Questions, Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Ms. Barclay. One of the residents, or a couple of the residents, are concerned about overlooking, recognising that it fits within the 9-metre view cone. Would your client be accepting of those balconies being raised from 1.1 metres, I think that's the glass balcony height, to 1.7 and frosted?
I believe they would. They would probably like the flexibility to design it in accordance with the res code, rather than whether that's a slats or glass. But yes, they would accept that.
So that they can, you know, could be angled up.
Yeah, exactly.
But up to that sort of 1.7
Yes.
height.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And with regard to the officers in their introduction to this report, spoke about a low density office density and a permit condition. Could you just talk to that from what you're prepared to accept?
Yeah, sure. So it is a little bit unusual. The client they've got 3 businesses. One's the restaurant and there's 2 offices. One of them's the architect that's designed the building, and they're going to occupy a floor each and then used the breakout space. So that's what's generating a greater floor area, because it is a bigger floor area than you would usually see for that kind of occupancy. But it's unique to these clients who would like to stay in the area long term, and they've accepted that, said they'll accept that condition.
And for the benefit of councillors, what's that low occupancy number?
25.
25 total?
Yes, total.
And that's including workers within the restaurant and the kitchen?
Yes.
But not patrons?
That's right.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank you,
Chair.
Councillor Thompson. Councillor Galt, followed by Councillor Franco.
Thank you very much. I was going to raise the issue of the frosted glass balconies as well, so thank you. Councillor Thompson, can I just clarify the parking provision on site? We've been talking about 10 to date, but when I look at the plans, it's really 4 and 4, it's 8, with a waiting space of 2 outside.
It's a specialised stacker system, and so it can move them around, and there's a total of 10 permanent car spaces, plus the on the site.
I'd love to see how that works.
Yeah, you need a video, it's very complicated, but it
when you
works.
look at the plan and the elevation, it looks like 8.
Yes, that's right. But I think we provided council a YouTube video of how it works, and they
squash a couple of cars.
Yeah.
Okay. Righto.
It's a bit like Jenga, I think.
Yeah. And the issue's been raised tonight that if this was permitted and built, and all great intentions on behalf of your client, but if they on-sold the building 2 or 3 years down the track and had twice as many people working in the building, it would there's no real way of controlling that from council's point of view, so that creates a real issue longer term, I would think.
There's a condition on the permit, which was up before. So it would have to come back to council.
We'll ask the officers that in a moment, thank you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gold. Councillor Park. Oh, sorry, Councillor Franco, followed by Councillor Park.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. In relation to your original application, how many car spaces did you seek? Was that
5.
And did they involve a car stack, or can they be delivered without car stackers?
It was always had a stacker, and what was done to accommodate the 10 is the client looked for a different type of stacker that could accommodate more and set the building back further. So there was a slight reduction in floor space and a setback to accommodate the waiting bay, and some clearance height, so it's floor level reduction, and a different type of stacker. But there was always, the original application also had a stacker.
If we did away with the stacker, how many car spaces could you
probably 2.
provide?
2.
Okay. So the minimum was for 5 parking spaces. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Franco. Councillor Park, followed by Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you. Where would a disabled employee park?
That's a good question. I think with these numbers, with the DDA requirements, I'm not sure if you require one. I think there's space on the ground floor, but I'll need to check with the traffic engineer.
Good luck to anyone who's in a wheelchair, I suspect, but all right. I presume there's no prospect of entry to this site from Burwood Road because Vic Roads wouldn't allow it.
That's
Is that
right.
the case?
That's correct.
The condition numbered proposed condition number 16, you're a very experienced planner. I guess that council could take residents could take little comfort from that. That there's a simple application subsequently to increase that number, isn't it?
Well, our client put forward this number, that's their intention, and they're not seeking to appeal that condition. They've already committed that to council in writing.
I understand, but that's today. If we project forward 5 years or 10 years, that could be easily changed, presumably.
Well, you would have to assess all the parking again, so you would need to provide more parking, you would assume, unless we're not driving cars anymore, which that would be good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Park. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you. I can appreciate we're nearly at time. Just a question with regard to the stackers. So just looking at the diagram, figure 10, the cars that would be afforded the opportunity to park on the top would have to be particularly small in height and size. Is that your understanding?
So council's traffic engineers, I believe, reviewed that in quite a lot of detail and asked for some changes to accommodate different types of cars.
Yes. Might be one for the officers later. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hollingsworth, and thank you for your presentation. Ms Barclay, please return to the gallery.
Mr Chair, sorry if I could just ask one further question, if I can.
We're getting close to the time.
We are, indeed.
Yeah, so
I'll ask the officers this question, Ms Barclay, but with regards to a section 173, is that possible to entertain?
I can try and get some instructions if my client's
And
still
that might alleviate the concerns of councillors with regards to changing numbers on occupancy.
Yeah, I'll just check, but I think they would accept that.
I would accept that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillors, I'll be in your hands because if we take too long, we might have to ask for another.
Chair, I'll
continuance.
move for extension till midnight.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Gold. Oh, Councillor Bigger, sorry. Councillor Bigger.
Got in first.
Councillors, I put the motion. Extension to midnight. Thank you, councillors. Okay, so now we move back to return to the officers for matters arising. Oh, sorry, we didn't get a response. I apologise for that. Councillor Thompson, you didn't get a response?
No, Ms Barclay did respond.
Yes, I thought she did, yeah.
Yeah, she said she'd entertain it.
Yeah.
Check it with the owners.
Yep. Just for clarification, Ms Barclay, would you just clarify it, just to the avoidance of doubt? Yes, thank you so much. All right. Wonderful.
Through you, Mr Chair, I'll respond in no particular order to the items raised, and I'll try to be as succinct as possible. With regard to the parking rates, the permit includes a condition limiting to staff to a total of 25 persons on site. By limiting the number of staff to 25 and providing 10 parking spaces, the proposal would provide a parking rate of 0.4 spaces per member of staff. Had the number of staff not been limited, the development as a whole could have had approximately 73 staff based on building regulations for office occupancy, and assuming up to 10 staff for the restaurant. If 26 spaces were provided, so the full car parking requirement were provided for 76 staff, this would comply with this planning scheme, albeit result in a parking rate of only 0.34 spaces per member of staff. This means that even though a parking waiver is being sought by limiting the number of staff to 25, the proposal provides more parking per person that would have been required under the planning scheme. I hope that made sense, but yeah, we hope we've reached that balance in car parking. With regard to car parking access via Burwood Road that has been raised, while, as noted, Vic Roads may not support it, if it were requested. Within a commercial corridor context, the location of vehicle access to the rear of the site via a laneway or similar is preferred. The preference for rear laneway access points is expressly detailed in clause 18.02 of the Burundara planning scheme. This preferred access limits interaction of vehicles with pedestrians within the principal public realm and also provides opportunity for maximum active streetscape frontage. Furthermore, the plans have been amended during the application process to address the potential queuing within the laneway. The applicant has provided the 5 metre setback in response to Council's transport engineer to provide the waiting bays to avoid inconvenience to other laneway users. With regard to the time to stacker, the stacker takes on average 80 seconds and has a waiting bay for the 2 cars. This is considered sufficient. I too, with regard to the 8 spaces, I had to watch the YouTube video and you do see how all the cars stack in, and it does accommodate 10 spaces, but yet the YouTube video does assist with understanding how they fit in. With regard to the vehicle size, it's 99% of cars should fit within the stacker. It won't accommodate an exceptionally large vehicle, but yet 99% of vehicles should fit within the vehicle stacker. Car stackers are increasingly common in residential and commercial developments to facilitate car parking, particularly where space is limited. The proposed car stacker will be required to comply with the relevant noise standards and EPA requirements. Furthermore, a condition has been included to the NOD to ensure that the car stacker remains in good working order. The 10-car stacker arrangement with bicycle storage facilities, end-of-trip facilities, in addition to the green travel plan, are, in our opinion, striking the correct balance in the strategic context of this application. With regard to the car stacker breaking down, ultimately the applicant must comply with the permit. The stacker must be maintained in good working order. With regard to overlooking and overshadowing, the proposal does fully comply with the requirements of Res Code. Clause 54.04-5 requires overshadowing to be assessed with regard to the shadow cast on September 22, and the application does comply with that. We do acknowledge that shadows in winter are longer and in summer are shorter, but ultimately the planning scheme directs us to assess on September 22nd. Clause 54.04-6 also requires us to assess overlooking within the 9 metre arc. With regard to the planning scheme changes raised by one of the objectors this evening, that they had received different advice on purchasing their property. Planning controls do change over time and require a planning scheme amendment. Any changes to the planning scheme go through a long process, which generally includes public consultation, council approval and approval by the Minister for Planning. With regard to construction noise, this is not directly controlled under the planning scheme. It is an unfortunate consequence of development. Developers must comply with EPA requirements and council's local laws. If there are concerns that these are being breached, complaints can be made to the EPA and council, which will be investigated and enforced. With regard to condition and impact to the Bluestone Laneway, the existing laneway condition and maintenance problems in the area cannot be addressed through the current application, nor should the burden of relieving these existing problems be imposed on the developer of the subject land. Council's website provides for road condition and repairs to be lodged for consideration. Council has an adopted road management plan, which documents the standards, policies and management system used by the City of Boroondara to discharge its duty to manage, inspect, repair and maintain the roads for which it is responsible. Persons wishing to discuss the road management can speak with Strategic Asset Management. And I believe I've addressed all the items.
Thank you for your detailed response, Ms.
Thank you,
Lorini. Councillors, any questions for the officers? Ms. Lorini, I have Councillor Gold.
Just quickly, the proposal potentially to put frosted or louvered balustrades at the end of the balconies, would officers be interested in imposing that on the proposal?
Slorini?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we would consider imposing that that condition if the councillors were to support the proposal.
The 173 condition I presume is to restrict the number of people that use the building. Are you confident that that would be an active and a successful that one could be applied to constrain the number of people in the building?
So,
Thanks, Chair. A Section 173 agreement, if agreed by the applicant, which has been indication would agree, that could be included as a requirement. Section 173 agreements aren't absolutely watertight. They can be amended, but it would give a greater level of surety around the restriction on numbers. It would also flag for future purchases any restriction that applies. So a purchaser would have that up front and centre through the title and restrictions on that title.
And my final question is something I know you can't deal with as part of this application tonight, but I'd like an opinion if it's possible. Would it be possible to consider much more stringent conditions in Edlington Street regarding resident parking? In other words, could both sides of the street be resident parking? And they use the visitor permits for visiting tradespeople and things like that.
Yeah, would you answer that?
Perhaps only briefly, but to say that, as I indicated in the earlier matter, parking restrictions are a matter for council, and council does look at and review parking restrictions. The standard approach to residential parking in these sorts of locations, however, would generally be permit parking on one side of the street and timed restrictions on the other side of the street. So that is a standard approach to managing what is a finite resource in a residential area, particularly where it is close to commercial locations where there can be parking pressures infiltrate those residential areas. So the approach that is currently there is the standard approach.
This is almost a test case with a huge reduction in parking concession. Maybe we have to look at adjoining restrictions differently. But if we can't resolve that tonight or get some sort of commitment to it, it's difficult to proceed. So there's no way of committing to that tonight is what you're saying.
That's the question?
It's a question.
Yeah.
That's certainly something that would need to be considered in a more strategic way as to the implications of that, and would involve extensive consultation, because we actually don't understand what all the different parties that have an interest in the parking in that street have to say and consider.
Councillor Gold.
Thank you.
Councillor Park, followed by Councillor Franco.
Thank you, Chair. I'll ask the question I put to the applicant's representative. Where would a disabled employee or visitor park?
Through you, Mr. Chair. The application does not meet the threshold requirement to provide disabled car parking on site.
Right, so of the 26 spaces that it should be providing, none of them would need to be disabled?
I'd need to check with regard to the 26 spaces, but my assessment noted that no disabled car parking was required, but I can double check that.
I'd find that exceptionally unlikely, given the 26 car parks. If none of them had to be disabled, that
can you?
Can't be right. He's 50 to 1.
Through yourself, Chair, I think just clarifying that with the planning officers, the referral for the planning application to the traffic team assessed the car parking, reviewed the car parking and didn't flag or indicate a requirement for disabled car parking with what's proposed before us, with the 10 car parking spaces.
Yeah, okay, but that's... So we're assessing it based on a presumption that council's going to reduce the requirement from 26 to 10. Is that what you're saying?
Through yourself, Chair, that's correct, because that's what the proposal is that's before us. It was actually an application for 5 car parking spaces with the proposal originally. It was increased to 10 car parking spaces through the application assessment process, and that's what the traffic engineers have considered, assessed and provided comment on.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Walker. Final question then. On page 98 or 16 of 29, whichever you prefer in terms of the numbering, it makes the assertion that the proposed reduction in standard car parking rate will not have an unreasonable impact on the amenity of the area, and also that because there's existing restrictions, that will cause staff to make alternative arrangements to avoid the disruption and cost of longer-term parking, etc. Upon what do we base those assertions? They just seem to be bald assertions. Well, you know, I'm not sure how we get to that.
You're asking for the question that what have they based it?
What's the basis for those two assertions?
Thanks, Chair. Happy to answer that, and that's something that has been discussed on a number of these similar types of planning applications with our traffic engineering team. And in particular in locations like this where there's commercial activity and significant intensification of activity on a main road, there are surrounding streets with parking restrictions within them, and those parking restrictions being permitted parking and time parking. And it is pretty common, and the advice provided by the traffic engineering team is that in those situations, the impact on parking in those surrounding areas is doesn't occur in anywhere near the extent that it would if there were no restrictions in the street. And that's simply a function of the fact that parking is a scarce resource and is already restricted in a significant way through the surrounding area. So an office, for example, if there's all-day car parking associated with an office, they simply can't park in those surrounding streets, and will look for alternative means of transport or other commercial arrangements in terms of leasing or accessing car parking.
So as part of this process, do we assess those immediate surrounding residential streets? Because it could simply push out the problem to the next street over, obviously, as often happens. At what point do we say, right, you know, how far do we go before we make an assertion like this?
Well, again, through yourself, Chair, again, that's a judgment that's made in the circumstances, and it's made by the traffic engineering team in consultation with the planners that are undertaking the assessment. So, yes, it's interesting. Car parking is one of those situations similar to water. You put something in one location and it pushes it around to other locations. So I understand the point being made, but it is something that needs to be a balance and a judgment as we have more development happen. There is more pressure on car parking, but we are changing and we are shifting. We are shifting more and more to other and alternative means of transport and other reducing the number of car parking spaces that are needed for new developments.
Yeah, I'm not, but thank you.
But we might not be answering it tonight. Thank you, Councillor Park. Councillor Franco, followed by Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you. Condition 20 states that the model of car stacker to be used is a Klaus combination system, etc., a specific model. Can you advise why we are requiring in a condition a specific brand and model of car stacker? And in answering that, is it because council is requiring an additional number of spaces to be provided by a car stacker? Would that, if the applicant's original request for 5, would we have still gone to recommending a particular brand and model of car stacker?
Through you, Chair. Yes to both, in that we ensure that the stacker that the transport engineer has assessed with regards to what vehicles can fit and the dimensions of the stacker and the like are ensured via permit condition, and that the number of spaces that were said to be provided by that stacker model in the dimensions that it can provide are ensured.
Councillor Franco, you seem not to be satisfied with that response.
Partly satisfied with the response. I just wonder what ease councillors could be given to knowing that the specific conditioning of a particular brand and model of stacker is based on sound traffic engineering advice. I mean, that's what we take, but
yeah, is your question relating to whether this stacker will do the job or whether there are alternative stackers?
An ease for us as elected councillors to knowing why we're conditioning a particular brand.
Yep. Yeah, could you answer that? Is that something that you can answer that? Why we are asking for a particular brand to be implemented?
I'll add, I actually don't know anything about the market for car stackers or how many competitors there are. I'll just throw that out there.
It's a valid question, though.
Through you, Chair. Klaus is one of the more prominent car vehicle stacker manufacturers. It's been insured via permit condition because that is the model of car stacker that our traffic engineer has reviewed and found acceptable. Okay. It meets the reliability, the dimensions of the cars that it can hold, meet the requirements of the design standard requirements, and so that's why we insure the model under the as a permit condition.
Thank you for that. Councillor Franco?
Yeah, and we don't believe there are other stackers that can...
Perhaps we can take that one offline to figure out whether...
It's an awkward one because we're dealing with this condition here and now.
Yep.
If I could maybe add, Chair,
Absolutely.
just to make the point that the condition enables some flexibility or change to a car stacker. There is a change could occur to the satisfaction of council, assuming the applicant is able to demonstrate a performance and approach for an alternative car stacker which meets the standards of the Klaus. So there is flexibility in the condition. The reason that this specific brand and car stacker has been nominated is because of its understanding for the traffic engineers. I understand its performance, its noise levels, its functionality for this particular situation, but an alternative that meets that same standard could be put forward if it meets those tests.
Could we simply add the words "or equal" after that clause?
Chair,
we could, but it's unnecessary because it is unless otherwise agreed in writing by the responsible authority.
But I seek your indulgence because I suspect that perhaps inadvertently Councillor Franco's question isn't being answered correctly. Isn't it the case that the applicant put this forward? And so the wording that ought to go in, if that premise is true, and that's certainly what I got from what from the applicant's submitter. It should say the model of car stacker used in the basement car park, in brackets, as proposed by the applicant, end brackets, and then that takes away the mystery. But if that's wrong, then surely, then, you know, it's not council's role to be saying you use this one.
I think Councillor Parker makes a good point, because if they've accepted it, then they've accepted it. But if they are forced into it, that's a different matter.
Councillor Parks, wasn't whether they've expected it, whether they've recommended it, proposed it, sorry.
He is, I understand that, but could you
Perhaps through yourself, Chair, it's a little bit of both. The applicant certainly did put it forward so that clarification could be included in the condition. The applicant has certainly made it clear that they accept this form of stacker, but it is the stacker that has been assessed and understood and is expected by the traffic engineers. There is a history of stackers not performing well, and there's an assurance there in the assessment that's been undertaken.
And now to my next question about the history of stackers not performing well. With your indulgence, Chair.
We're going to get a history now, Councillor Frank?
I know. I want to ask my second question. Why are we recommending an increase in any provision of car stacking, let alone a doubling of the amount of car parking with stacking? The report makes a really good case for the reduction in car parking in this location, and in the subsequent dialogue, high growth area, inner city. It's a changing nature of the way people live and work, and yet we go down a path of not only requiring a stacker but doubling the amount of cars parked with the stacker, knowing the long-term implications of providing car parking through car stacking, when alternative, perhaps more environmentally considered, or alternative forms of getting to work and living and working and shopping and operating are available to us.
I don't think it's our job to design the building, but could you respond to that, please?
I perhaps won't go into too much detail in responding to that, but say that this is a judgment and a balance that's been reached in conjunction with the assessment by the traffic engineers about the extent of car parking that is considered necessary for this proposal, while still providing a reduction in car parking and a shift away from absolute reliance on car parking being the only means of accessing the site.
Thank you, Councillor Franco. Councillor Hollingsworth, and I'll go back to Councillor Gold.
Thank you. My question's for Ms Larini, just with regard to Mr Barclay's presentation, where he talked about putting in writing a request for consideration to reduction of building, reduction of loss of amenity, and highlighting what he perceived to be with some significant impacts. Did you put any of those recommendations that he put forward about how the building could be improved to the applicant to see if there was a willingness to, with the applicant, to take away some of the reduction of the building?
Through you, Chair. All objections were forwarded on to the permit applicant for review and consideration.
Thank you. So there was no willingness to work with the objectors with regard to trying to reduce some of the impact bulk issues?
The applicant came back with an amended proposal that provided additional car parking, because there were some objectors that were concerned about car parking. The applicant did flag they made changes to the front facade as well in response to Council's urban design comments as well. With regards to rear setbacks were modified to accommodate the vehicle stackers. With regard to overlooking and overshadowing, the proposal is fully compliant with regard to Res Code.
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Gold.
Keen to move a motion, Chair.
Will there be no further questions? The time is now.
I have no further questions, thank you.
Thank you. Got a seconder?
I haven't moved the motion.
Oh, sorry.
Yet.
Would you like to move a motion?
Hear it before I get a second? I may not get a seconder. I'd like to move the officer's recommendations with 3 additional conditions, which may or may not be acceptable. First, that the balconies have 1.7 metre high. Does that apply to me? 1.7 metre high, either opaque glass or slatted balustrades at the back, at the rear of the building. That a 173 agreement be placed on the title, constraining the number of employees that are employed in the building. And thirdly, that no work proceed on the planning permit until such a time as constraints are established in Edlington Street behind the building, that it's resident-only parking. Thank you.
I'm happy to second the first 2 points, but I don't think we can do the third.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Gold, you've heard Councillor Thompson's response. Are you comfortable to take the
I'm
third
happy
on?
to let it run on that basis.
You run on that basis? So Councillor
And we'll
Thompson...
run the others separately, the other matters separately.
Yeah, and Councillor Thompson is a seconder then?
So for the first 2 points, not the third?
Yeah.
The third's irrespective of the planning application. It can't be considered.
Yeah, no, I totally understand that. I'm just sort of saying, then you're comfortable to receive that feedback, and then you're moving it and you're seconding it. Thank you very much for that. So, councillors, we have a mover and a seconder. Is anybody in opposition? Oh, vehement opposition. Okay, vigorous. All right then, Councillor Gold.
I mean, we're either going to need to move a further. Look, can I move the extension till 12:30?
Yeah.
And I'd encourage that.
Well, in your hands, yes.
Well, I'll move that, but what I'd encourage is that maybe we could is keep the debate really tight on this one, and obviously there's another motion that's going to come forward.
I think.
Can I speak to it now?
No. We need to do the continuance first. So do I have to say, Councillor Sinfield, seconder? Councillors, the motion to continue.
Well, do we have a second?
Unanimous. Thank you, councillors. So we're continuing to 12:30. Councillor Gold.
I'm putting this in this way because I think we're going to face this more and more. And we've already approved a building in Glenferrie Road with substantially less parking in it, and this is going to become a trend, I would think. I'm viewing this as a test case for how we handle this, and it's not going to be easy, but we're going to have to work very closely. And I'm trusting in the officers and council that we will consider parking in the rear street at the same time. And I think if parking is very constrained in this building and there isn't parking readily available and it isn't in Burwood Road, the employees in this building will tend not to drive to work. They will find another way of doing it if there just isn't parking. It will be self-regulating in my view. So that's why I'm happy to move this as it stands with those other 2 conditions, which is to do with the balcony and the number of employees on the site. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gold, for your succinct. Councillor Thompson, we should speak now or reserve your right?
No, just very quickly. This is on Burwood Road. Burwood Road's strategically zoned in a way that it's meant to take this type of development. And council's been very strategic in adopting that over many years to actually protect residential amenity in other areas. This thing complies. We've heard it from the officers. It may not be something that we necessarily like. It's got a condition on it. They're happy to take a section 173. Just let it go through. It's fine. I don't know why we're going on about it.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Sinfield, followed by Councillor Addis.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 4 points in relation to what I think is an unacceptable overdevelopment of this site. And while in part I agree with what Councillor Thompson said, Burwood Road and the frontage to Burwood Road is an appropriate use of this for a mixed-use development. But my major objection is the non-compliance with parking. It's just utterly unacceptable. It's not a dispensation of 1 or 2 spaces. This is outrageous. Stackers have been proven not to work time and time again. I don't know if there's some virus that stackers get around Auburn Road and Burwood Road, but it seems to be the hub for stacker malfunctions as far as I'm aware. 25 workers in that site, all well and good. WACA 173 on it. Can anyone in this room name a time where anyone has ever done an inspection to see whether, in fact, years down the track, that is still holding true? I just don't think that it's worth the paper it's written on, frankly. I question the DDA compliance. From the quick little bit of research that I did, it appears as though for a development of that sort, one disabled space or accessible parking bay would be required. I'm certainly no authority on it, but I question its compliance in relation to that. I'll leave my comments there, but I'm happy to foreshadow a refusal motion should this fail.
Thank you, Councillor Sinfield. Councillor Addis.
Thanks, Chair. Look, I can see the logic of why we might approve this, but having run a business for many years on a main road that was opposite a railway station, I know from experience, and it had limited number permit, it was never ever checked, and that was perhaps lucky for us on the odd occasion that it was never ever checked. And the staff used to kick up a huge fuss when parks weren't available for them. They wouldn't even walk a block or two. And we'd say, well, you know, station across the road, bus going up and down, but no way they would walk, or they would expect us to not park in the park so they could. Fair enough, but it didn't work, and I doubt the ability to enforce it. I can see there's goodwill, but I don't see how it could be enforced. So, yeah, I just can't support it on that basis from my own experience.
Thank you, Councillor Addis. Councillor Councillor Park, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I've been employing staff for 30-something years, and I've yet to see any single one on any day ever turn up on a push bike. I encourage them, but it doesn't happen. I agree with some of what Councillor Thompson said until he said of this development, it's fine. It's not fine, it's short 16 car spaces. That's the problem here. And it's not fine. We've heard from the residents that are really badly affected by this proposal. It just simply isn't fine. And if anyone who's listened to what they had to say really couldn't reach that conclusion. It's clearly an application that ought to be rejected.
Thank you, Councillor Park. Councillor Franco, followed by Councillor Hollingsworth.
Well, I differ to Councillor Park. I've seen people who commute to work using all forms of transport, not just cars, and I've been one of those myself. So I think a good case has been made for reducing the car parking provisions. I think it should go a lot further. I think our planning scheme, which is requiring minimums to be provided, should actually be reversed to be looking in high growth areas to have maximums. That's a separate but related point. I think I'll support Councillor Gold's motion because he's made the case, and I think I'll be out on my own probably in seeking an even greater reduction in the car parking to remove the stackers completely. But I do think in areas like this we have to grasp a changing reality in terms of the way people live and work, commute. There are changing cities in inner cities where the expectations of large numbers of car parking to accommodate excessive cars and large numbers of staff expecting to commute by motor car and park for free. Well, this is a landscape that changes, and we see it in cities around the world and inner city areas in Melbourne and other prominent cities in our country. Look, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Franco. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really wanted to support this application. I actually think architecturally it's very unique, attractive, and would add value to the precinct. But unfortunately, I just cannot resolve with the fact that there is such a significant car park deficiency, and this would put such an impost on the neighbouring residents. This is a heritage overlay area beside and behind and around, and I know the area well. My business did have a suite at Pacific Tower there for many, many years, and we struggled back then to get car park, and we know when we had clients and visitors come to our office, they struggled to get car park. I can only assume it is worse. I do agree that, you know, there is a lot of public transport opportunity, but this is a lot of people proposed to be in a 4-level building, and the car park provision is inadequate. And I thank Councillor Park for highlighting that I believe there should be at least one car park that would suit people of disability. So I unfortunately cannot support this.
Thank you, Councillor Hollingsworth. Any other councillor wish to speak? I'll say a couple of things only. Look, I really wanted to support it, as Councillor Hollingsworth has indicated, but the presentations were made to us and some of the issues that Councillor Park raised, I don't want us to force a particular issue into what kind of employees need in terms of transport to get to work. I think that should be open for everybody, and including people that have got disabled needs, and that's I think appropriate, even though it is, you know, I very much want to support it. So unfortunately I have to go against it as well. Having said that, Councillor Galt, I'll come back to you for final words.
I wouldn't dare.
Thank you, Councillor Wood. I think that's wise. I'll put the motion now. Those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4 in favour. Those against? 1, 2, 3. The motion has failed. Councillor Sinfield, you indicated that you would be willing to move another motion.
Yep, a refusal, please. I don't know if officers have anything prepared or whether we need a short adjournment to accommodate that.
Do we have anything prepared? We'll give them a couple of minutes. We don't need to adjourn for this. We'll just wait it out.
In your hands, Chair.
Councillors, we have a motion up on the screen. Would you resume the seats, please? Councillor Sinfield?
I'm happy with that, thanks to officers.
And I'm seeking somebody to second that.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I've been pretty quiet tonight.
Councillor Park, one second. I'm going to turn everything off. Can you please press your button again? Thank you. I had a number of other councillors say. Thank you, Councillor Park, for the seconder. So, councillors, I guess we put the motion to the vote.
Any opposition?
Any opposition? Yes. Councillor Thompson is opposition. Councillor Sinfield, would you like to speak to your motion?
I see little point in speaking to it. I think the debate has been had. I'll just seek clarification from officers in relation to clause 2 of the proposed motion there as to whether it should be heritage place or places, plural.
Or precinct.
But I'm in officers' hands there.
Through yourself, Chair, the heritage place would be the precinct. So the place is in fact either a site, individual site, or an entire precinct.
Thank you. Chair, I'm happy for the motion to be put.
Thank you. Councillor, okay. I put the motion now. Those in favour? 6. Those against? 1, 2. The motion is passed. Thank you. Thank you, councillors. But before we've reached the end of the meeting, is there anything else that reached the end of the meeting? So I close the meeting. But before I close the meeting, I want to thank you all who have joined us this evening, and I declare the Urban Planning Delegated Committee meeting closed.